Hey everyone, I'm Cosmic and welcome to the Cloud. A few months ago, I put out a video ranking every single player level in the Splatoon series. It ended up being a pretty massive project, but also something I had a lot of fun making, and a lot of you guys seem to like it too. A notable omission from that video was any discussion of Splatoon's boss fights, as I didn't think it would be fair to compare them to the typical obstacle course style missions. So here's the obvious sequel video in which we cover that exact topic. It's time to give my thoughts on the rest of Splatoon's single player gameplay, a ranking of every Splatoon boss fight from worst to best. Let's do it. Before we begin, let's lay out the criteria by which I will be judging each boss. Similar to my level ranking video, I will be scoring each fight in 3 categories. However, they have been altered this time around to better fit the discussion at hand. In this video, I will be rating each boss fight on its mechanics, its spectacle, and its identity. First, we will judge the mechanics. How does the fight make use of Splatoon's core gameplay, and what new elements does it introduce? How does the boss develop as the fight goes on? This category not only considers the boss's attacks and movement patterns, but also the abilities and weapons of the player character. If the boss is fun to dodge and it's fun to fight back, it will score well. Then we will get into the details of spectacle. How well is the boss supported by the visual and auditory design of the fight? How does the boss balance aesthetic appeal and gameplay clarity? Does it make sense for a boss and its arena to look the way they do, and is there a cohesive theme tying everything together? Do the setting and circumstances of the fight enhance the player's emotional experience? The boss's background music will also be considered in this category. If every boss had its own unique song, I might have created a separate score just for music, but since many of them share the same track, I'm just gonna keep things simple and grant extra spectacle points to the ones that go the extra mile. Last is a boss's identity. The bounds of this category are a bit more vague, but what I'm basically asking is, what gives this boss its unique character? What distinguishes it from other fights or makes it especially memorable? Identity can come from any combination of innovative mechanics, standout visuals, music, or dialogue. You can think about this category as the boss's iconic factor. Is the boss a major set piece that defines the aesthetic of the game, or is it just another forgettable obstacle? It's not about how polished the gameplay is or how impressive the presentation, but the impact that the boss leaves on the player. Obviously, that means this score is pretty subjective, but it was the best way I could think of to factor in more specific elements of each boss that don't neatly fit into the first 2 categories. Having a score for identity also allows me to praise a boss for exceptional creativity, even if the execution of its ideas falls short. I think you'll see what I mean when we get into the rankings. From mechanics to spectacle to identity, we will evaluate the design of each boss on both a concrete and abstract level. These 3 criteria will be scored from 1 to 5, meaning the lowest possible score will be a 3 and the highest will be 15. I don't think any of Splatoon's bosses completely fail in these categories, which is why I have elected to make a score of 0 impossible. A few more key points before we begin. All phases of a boss will be considered for its ranking, even if the phases feature significantly different gameplay. For example, both the battle on the rocket and the Octobot King phase of Splatoon 3's final boss will be counted as a part of the Mr. Grizz fight. Rematches will be counted as their own bosses. That means each of the Octo Expansion Octoboss fights, as well as regular and Inner Agent 3, are fair game. Octo Canyon bosses will be ranked with the Sheldon Request weapon in mind. This is the weapon you are required to use on a first playthrough, and the bosses are pretty clearly designed first and foremost around these selections. You can replay each of these bosses with the other 8 weapons, but this is often more of a power trip for completionists rather than an additional challenge. Either way, I don't think it would add much to the discussion to talk about every possible combination. That said, certain Octo Expansion bosses do give you a choice of weapon on your first run through, and they are balanced around these specific options, so I will compare how they play out depending on what you choose. Last, bosses from Splatoon 3 side order will be ranked. While there are a number of variables that can alter the experience of these fights, I will try to consider the elements that remain consistent regardless of your loadout. about, as well as generalize the elements that do change in order to justify each boss's ranking. And now that all of that has been established, it's time to begin. With 5 bosses in each of the base campaigns, 7 in Octo Expansion, and 5 more in Side Order, we have 27 bosses to get through. Ready? Here we go. To start us off, we have one of Octo Expansion's Octoboss rematches. While this is a second fight against a previous boss, its lack of originality isn't the main reason it places this low. The second go against the Octo Samurai actually is fairly distinct from its first encounter, and a pretty unique boss in general. So what went right and what went wrong? While the Octo Canyon fight was a roller-on-roller duel, this one leans into the samurai's sumo-inspired design with a sumo match. The fight involves the boss and the player bumping into one another, with the samurai using attacks that can shove you out of the ring. Your weapon for this battle is the Baller Special, which I praised in my level ranking video for its versatility in platforming missions, but that praise is unfortunately not applicable to the special's combat abilities. Your 2 methods of attack are to lightly bump into the enemy or to hold down the trigger to explode. Neither of these feel especially satisfying to use, and with how much HP the samurai has, they both feel exceptionally weak. Baller is a multiplayer special designed to kill enemy players in a single hit, or to knock them back with its shockwave and splash damage. But that's not how it works against the samurai. Instead, you have an extremely slow attack with a long recovery period as the baller reactivates, but no satisfying payoff to balance out these drawbacks. Attacking this boss just feels bad. What about dodging it? Well, that's even worse. The Baller is designed to tank damage. It is not designed to dodge spin attacks or quickly change direction. I understand that this is the point. Restricting the player to the Baller is meant to be an additional challenge, in line with Octo Expansion's tendency to remix existing mechanics into new difficult objectives. But piloting a slow, weak ball against an enemy with tons of HP and a one-shot attack makes for a fight that just feels unfair. There are some fences at the edge of the arena that might catch you from falling out, but it's pretty much a coin toss whether or not that actually happens. The problem here isn't that the boss is difficult. I love difficulty when it's fair, but dying to this boss can often just feel cheap. Even when properly dodging the samurai's attacks, they don't feel particularly tuned to this version of the fight. Since it's so easy to close the distance in this smaller arena, the Octocycle attack feels a bit pointless, and the samurai's jump doesn't even clear the range of the baller's explosions. The attacks themselves are well telegraphed, and they still evolve as the fight goes on, with the samurai introducing vertical flicks, but the combination of a slow weapon, long phases, and the potential to have all your progress erased by a single mistake makes for a fight that is, at best, agonizingly slow, and at worst, punishing and frustrating. Especially in Octo Expansion, a campaign that generally nails tough level design, this boss stands out as a rare example of the game failing to stick the landing. Let's talk spectacle. It's not anything to write home about. The Octo Samurai has a pretty great comedic design in its original appearance, but this is just a recolor. And while all of the rematches are just recolored versions of existing bosses, I'd say this one turned out the worst. The other Octo bosses are mostly robotic, so it feels like you're just fighting the same type of machine, only using sanitized ink. The Samurai, on the other hand, feels more like a single specific character, so it's a bit strange to fight another one. I also think its goofy design clashes somewhat with the look and feel of the sanitized enemies, making this version feel overall confused in its presentation. The arena is designed to look like a sumo ring, which is a nice touch, but it's pretty simple, and the background is only slightly altered from Octo Canyon. It's totally serviceable for what the fight is, but not anything memorable in my opinion. The track Oct Armament scores the fight, which is a song I enjoy, but it's shared with 7 other fights, and due to how long each of the phases can take, you'll be hearing the fairly boring and repetitive early sections of the track for much longer. All in all, a pretty poor showing in this category as well. Last is Identity, where I'll give it some credit. The idea of a sumo match boss fight, where both the enemy and the player try to shove each other out of the ring, is super cool on paper, and I appreciate that the arena and some of the dialogue plays into it. I just wish that's what the fight actually was. If we could push the samurai out of the ring to end the phase early, this boss could have been much higher on the list. Unfortunately, it just doesn't commit to that concept when it comes to the gameplay. And, as I just stated, the samurai himself is just a recolored version of an existing character. I guess it's not impossible that an Octarian with a similar physical build and identical weapon could have been sanitized by Kamaboko, but let's be honest, this doesn't feel like its own character. It feels like a repurposed asset, which is exactly what it is. That leaves us with, essentially, a worse Octo Samurai fight. A boss that, to me, is only memorable for taking what is actually quite a good base fight and making it feel terrible. I really do love most of Splatoon's bosses, but this is one I simply never enjoy. The previous boss featured several design choices that make it actively annoying to fight. In comparison, the dreaded Octonozzle doesn't do anything terribly wrong, it just doesn't do anything all that well either. I don't think it's a hot take to say this is the most underwhelming boss in the series. Mechanically speaking, it's very simple. The player has to approach the boss from a distance, avoiding the blobs of ink it sends from its nose siphon thing. Shooting a weak point stuns the boss, causing it to send out a shockwave that knocks the player back. Inking the surface of the boss, jumping across its mode of ink, and shooting the tentacle on top deals a hit. Subsequent phases add additional weak points and some variations to the ink blobs the boss fires. It's a serviceable fight on paper, but there are a few things that hold it back. First, popping a weak point while the boss is charging an attack cancels its fire. This makes the fight way easier than it needed to be. The ink blobs are already pretty simple to dodge, considering you're going to be rotating around the boss anyway looking for the next weak point. Even if you aren't playing that aggressively, for whatever reason, there are pieces of cover to hide behind all around the arena. The boss itself is stationary, so it can't do anything if you're out of its range. The shockwave it sends out after being weakened is kind of a cool touch, but it doesn't really do anything because there's nothing to push the player into, and you have plenty of time to swim right back. And even if you do get hit, its attacks never deal enough damage to take you out instantly. Octonozzle is the only Splatoon 1 boss that's afraid to one-shot you, and you always have ample time to heal before the next barrage. One-shots are annoying on a fight like the sanitized samurai, but when a phase is this simple to clear, I wouldn't mind the attacks having a bit more bite to compensate. If this was the first boss in the game, I could maybe excuse the lack of challenge, but you fight Octostomp 7 levels before this, and that's a much more interesting and difficult enemy. There's not a whole lot in terms of spectacle either. I do like the giant fishing net that surrounds the arena, and it kinda plays into the nozzle's kelp-covered look, but this has got to be one of the most forgettable designs in all of Splatoon. It's really just a generic Octarian robot. Of course, generic by Splatoon standards still means it's pretty weird. I like the way its big glassy eyes turn on at the start of each phase and the pair of sneakers it has on its tiny robotic legs. It's definitely a look that works for one of the great Octo weapons, but it doesn't really do anything to stand out beyond that. Which means it's also not scoring well in Identity. It's a robot with some vague octopus theming that shoots ink at you. That's about as basic as you can get for a Splatoon boss, and with only a handful of nearly identical attacks, the gameplay isn't saving it. In Splatoon 1, a game with solid to strong boss design overall, Octonozzle is the clear weakest link. Next up, the Hype Manta Storm, Big Man. Right away, let's address the elephant in the room. Big Man's fight is a reference to Phantomanta from Super Mario Sunshine. Like Big Man, Phantomanta is a massive manta shadow that moves along the ground and splits into smaller mantas when shot at. Rather than using his signature ink color, like Shiver and Fry do, the ink in Big Man's fight matches the colors of Phantomanta's electric goop. And the subtitle for the fight references the Serena Beach episode that contains the original boss. So This is absolutely, undeniably a direct reference, and it's a reference whose novelty is not lost on me. I really like Mario Sunshine. I've 100%ed it 3 times, and it's a game whose summer theming and general quirkiness have always felt analogous to Splatoon's. Those who experienced Splatoon 1 in its prime will probably remember the game being compared to Sunshine, to the extent that there was even a fake leak of a Sunshine crossover that a lot of people fell for. So to see the similarities between the games officially acknowledged 7 years later was a super cool full circle moment, especially when Sunshine is a game that doesn't get this kind of niche character representation all that often. As a massive fan of both Splatoon and the 3D Mario series, I love this reference. But I do not love this boss fight. Conceptually, borrowing a boss design from a game that shares similar mechanics of covering the ground in liquid makes a lot of sense, but in practice, this boss doesn't work in Splatoon. Unlike in Mario Sunshine, where Phantom Manta's goop deals significant damage, Big Man's toxin works just like typical enemy ink, meaning the shadows aren't very threatening. For the most part, you can just mindlessly shoot at them. The objective of the fight is to split the mantas up until you find the real Big Man, which again isn't a terrible idea, but there just isn't much going on to make this engaging. Big Man's attacks mostly take the form of weapons from multiplayer, including torpedoes, splat bombs, tri-stringer explosives, and ink strikes. These do at least force you to keep moving around the arena, maybe occasionally throwing out a splashdown, but as long as you aren't literally standing still, it's unlikely you're going to take much damage, at least in the first 2 phases. The only fully unique move in his arsenal is this charge attack, which can actually be pretty threatening and is fun to avoid, but everything else is just taken from multiplayer. And that's kind of a big issue. I would honestly argue that it worsens the fight in all 3 categories. Not only are these attacks not unique, they aren't contextualized in any special way or made to fit into any kind of theme. They're just multiplayer sub-weapons. I'm not really sure why this is the case. It feels like they programmed in the shadows and then ran out of time for the rest of the fight. What's especially odd about this fight is the phase changes, or rather the lack of them. Like most other bosses, Big Man takes 3 hits to be defeated, with a cutscene to signify the start of each phase. But while other bosses gain better defenses and stronger attacks over the course of the battle, Big Man sorta just does the same thing 3 times. The Manta splits into more and more shadows with each phase, and in phase 3 the torpedoes start targeting the player, but beyond that, it's pretty much just shooting at the floor over and over again. The arena very slightly transforms on the final phase, but I'm not really sure what impact this is supposed to have. The only praise I can really give is that you are incentivized to charge and use your splashdown, a universal mechanic throughout Splatoon 3's campaign that's barely utilized in the standard stages, but that only makes this boss even easier. To be honest, it feels like the Splatoon team misunderstood what made the Phantom Manta fight interesting. The battle on Serena Beach was much more dynamic due to the terrain being so varied. You could hide under a hut to avoid the mantas, gain high ground to shoot faraway targets, and swim in the ocean to grab health restoring coins. Big Man's arena, on the other hand, is just a flat circle with no opportunities for creative movement or strategy. It's also worth talking about the point in the game in which you fight Big Man. This is the last of the 3 fights against Deep Cut, placed right before the ending sequence of Splatoon 3's story mode. By this point, not only will the player have a decent grasp on the game's controls, but it's likely they will have significantly upgraded their hero gear. Going into this fight with the level 1 hero shot might prove a challenge, but considering how early the shot upgrade appears on the skill tree, that's probably not how most players will experience it. Not to mention, the sensor upgrade trivializes the entire premise of the fight by showing you exactly which shadows you need to shoot. I don't think this was a good decision. It pretty much removes the single interesting mechanic at play. Moving on to the visuals, the arena looks pretty nice, and I like the detail of these banners turning around at the same time as Big Man in his intro cutscene. The green aura that flares up around Big Man as he uses his phantom technique is pretty neat, and as previously stated, the reference to Mario Sunshine is really cool on a surface level. I also like that the Deep Cut logo appears within Big Man's ink. There's nothing too flashy going on besides that though. We are still just fighting on a big flat circle. Deep Cut's battle theme, Surprise and Shine, is honestly my least favorite of the standard boss themes by a pretty significant margin, so that's not doing much for me. Overall, the spectacle is fine. In terms of identity, well, it's complicated. complicated. As previously stated, almost none of the gameplay here is all that unique. The shadows splitting up and spawning bombs is a mechanic, but this ends up feeling more like a turf war simulator than a boss fight. Splatoon 3's campaign already spends a significant amount of time asking you to shoot at targets on the ground, making the gimmick of this fight stand out even less. With that said, the members of Deep Cut are unique compared to the previous entries on this list in that they aren't just boss fights. They're characters in the game's story, with defined personalities. Big Man's gameplay may not stand out, but him being a talking humanoid manta ray certainly does. Big Man is only fighting us because he was ordered to by Shiver and Fry, reluctantly using his special ability and trying his best to sound threatening. He doesn't have particularly deep or significant dialogue, but hey, he has dialogue. That's more than the past two bosses can say. So sure, I can't say the boss is completely forgettable. It's just one that I personally find incredibly anticlimactic, underdeveloped, and carried almost entirely by the novelty of referencing another game. It's a repetitive fight, with 3 nearly identical phases, and one that is made laughably easy with upgraded gear. Its decent presentation and the charm of Big Man as a character save it from obscurity, but it's not getting any higher than this. In my video ranking every Splatoon level, I decided to not include the floors from side order, with my reasoning being that the experience of a floor can differ greatly depending on which hacks you have turned on, which palette you use, and which color chips you equip. Of course, all of those variables also affect how side order's boss fights play out. However, in my opinion, there are enough constants here that can be compared to other bosses, namely the visual design, attack patterns, and weaknesses of each. I also fought each boss a number of times with different palettes for this video, to get a broad idea of how the boss might change in a number of different scenarios. And considering the criteria, these guys didn't do all that well. The gameplay of Parallel Cannon is essentially 3 waves of CPU players that drop down into a static arena. This almost fails to qualify as a boss fight. There isn't a single attack that's entirely unique to this encounter, with the enemies themselves fighting pretty much identically to the rival Octolings we've seen in every other campaign as standard enemies. However, there are 3 main things that set Parallel Cannon apart. First, the enemies drop out of a cage at the start of the fight and glide down with a drone, mirroring the way the player enters the stage. Second, they actually scale to the strength of your current palette, equipping a color chip for every 2 chips the player has of the same tone. Third, they can spawn in some gelatins to back them up. Unfortunately, features 2 and 3 rarely come into play because of the massive nerf that is feature 1. Each of the robot inklings slowly floats down from a specific point above the arena, making them stupidly vulnerable to just about anything you throw at them. Once you become aware of this, every single run of the boss will boil down to sitting under the cage, waiting for one to drop down, and immediately picking them off. The idea of the enemies scaling in strength according to your palette is really cool, but because they never gain an increase in HP, there's very little they can do. Short-ranged options like dualies might give you a little bit of trouble, but go in with even a modest amount of reach and they simply don't stand a chance. Now, there are a few moments in the fight that can lead to interesting interactions. Sometimes an enemy will drop out of the cage with a triple splashdown, forcing you to respect their landing. If you have the area around their landing properly inked, they probably aren't going to get very far, but that at least requires some preparation on the part of the player. You do have to use the time between waves wisely, taking back ink control and potentially restoring your armor. It's not that the fight is brain dead easy, it's just that for a boss that seems like it was conceptualized as feeling different to fight every single time, there's a simple and pretty boring strategy that consistently invalidates that potential. This boss could have been significantly better if the enemies simply super jumped into the arena like the Octolings in Girl Power Station or After Alterna. The commitment to the theme of mirroring the player's moveset, even down to the drop out of the cage, unfortunately neutered this boss of almost any variety. But let's talk about that theming, because the look and vibe of the intensifying harmony is amazing. Fighting a squad of robotic Inklings is a clever spin on the typical hordes of Octolings, and the boss may not be a true appearance of Agent 4, but it being a creation of orders that is based on 4 is honestly still a really interesting idea, and I love that the leader takes on the appearance of your agent specifically if you have Splatoon 2 data on your console. In fact, everything about this intro cutscene is really cool, from the way the leader yanks their weapon out of the ink, the posing of all the different clones, the fact that this last guy sticks around and gets pulled into the ink by one of the others. There's a really solid visual identity here. The music, Echo Onslaught, is a tense, energetic track that greatly elevates the atmosphere of the fight. Side Orders bosses do each have their own unique themes, and they do a lot to help them stand apart. But if we're talking about its identity as a boss fight, I can't give it a perfect score. Mechanically, nearly everything here is taken from other parts of the game. A significant portion of the fight will likely be spent just shooting at gelatins, like every other level in Side Order. And the terrain and visuals of the arena are pretty generic compared to the DLC's other fights. Parallel canon is a really cool concept. I love the idea that this is 8's equivalent of a rival Octoling stage against a group of Inklings, and under the right circumstances, there can be some fun, tense combat against CPU opponents. I just wish they didn't go down so easily, and I wish there was more to make this fight stand out beyond its visuals and music, because the gameplay just doesn't do them justice. Next in line, the rampaging Octowhirl. Another Octo Valley boss, though one that's pretty distinct from the others. Octowhirl uses the classic Nintendo boss trope of being a giant version of a standard enemy, in this case the Octoball. It takes the concept of covering terrain to submerge an enemy in ink and pushes it to the extreme. More than any other Splatoon boss, Octowhirl feels like a puzzle, where most of the enjoyment of the fight comes from figuring out how to beat it. The boss will begin by spinning around the arena, inking some turf, before aiming at the player and quickly rolling forward. Shooting at it directly doesn't deal any damage, and it doesn't have any obvious weak points. But if you're observant, you'll notice that it slows down when rolling over your ink. The strategy then is to ink a line across the arena and position yourself so that the boss gets stuck and eventually sinks into your ink, exposing the tentacle. The way this fight develops is also really clever. After each phase, the arena is altered. First by making a section of the floor rotate, then by making some surfaces uninkable. I like that this boss respects the player's intuition. There's no dialogue during the fight, so it takes observing the boss's behavior and exploiting its weakness in order to win. The issue is that, like with the past few bosses on this list, it's just a bit underwhelming. The first time beating Octowhirl can be a memorable moment, but on a replay, you realize just how little there is to it. The boss only has one attack, and it is, by design, not likely to kill you. I just described the fight as a puzzle, but that means without the step of figuring out what to do, it just comes down to executing the one correct answer. Visually, Octowhirl is designed after a clam with giant glowing eyes. It's honestly one of my favorite looks between the Octoweapons and Octobosses. I also really like the detail of these turning gears under the glass sections of the arena. Beyond that though, the presentation is pretty average. I do think Octowhirl deserves points for identity, because while it is, in a way, just another Octarian robot, the method of defeating it is entirely unique. But while this battle is novel, it unfortunately just doesn't hold up that well in my opinion. I can definitely see how adding more complexity may have overcomplicated the puzzle of how to defeat the boss, but the result is a fight that's just not that fun to come back to. Part of me feels bad for putting Octowhirl this low. It's a boss that makes use of Splatoon's ink mechanics in a really distinct and interesting way. Unfortunately, it just doesn't push the idea far enough to give it a better score. Ah yes, the mighty Octostomp. One of the series' recurring boss fights, Octostomp is a tradition that started at the very beginning. As the first Splatoon boss chronologically, it's not anything crazy in terms of design or complexity, but it is a very solid introductory fight, making good use of Splatoon's core mechanics. After 3 levels teaching you how to shoot, dodge, and climb, Octostomp tests you on those exact skills. You can even maneuver around the boss by using stealth, though it's not all that useful. To deal damage, you have to dodge the boss's face plant attack, ink its side, then shoot the weak point. After each phase, it becomes more difficult to climb, with the surface area getting smaller and the panels starting to move. Unfortunately, this version of the boss doesn't gain any new attacks with each phase, it just continues to chase you down, trying to crush you with its face, which easily makes this the worst rendition of the fight. It's not that it isn't fun, it actually holds up quite well in my opinion, it's just been outdone by all of its other appearances. The reason Octostomp places higher than the previous bosses is because, even being as simple as it is, it's always fun to return to. There are surprisingly few fights in the series that require any level of precise platforming, so that element helps this iteration continue to stand out. The fight is over quickly, but the boss's aggression and unique method of defeat put it above the weakest entries in my opinion. Visually, Octostomp is just about the most Nintendo-looking thing ever. It's literally a giant video game cube with a face. I wouldn't say it gets a lot out of the Octarian's octopus or scrap metal theming, but you know, it's Octostomp. Probably not a design you're gonna forget. The legs definitely help. In fact, when it comes to identity, I would say Octostomp is one of Splatoon's most iconic bosses, having appeared in some form in 4 out of the 5 campaigns. While not necessarily one of my favorites, it's nice to have a familiar face outside of the main cast, and one who carries on the legacy of Octo Valley. Incidentally, while this doesn't really have to do with the boss itself, this is the first appearance of the fabled boss room sounds. This audio served as the series' first real mystery, and just one more intriguing element of Splatoon's world. I'm not really factoring it into the scores of any bosses, but it certainly alters the atmosphere of these arenas once the dust has settled, and as a mostly lore-focused channel, I couldn't resist talking about it at least once. All in all, Octostomp represented a strong start for bosses to come, including several more versions of itself. But before we get to those, we have someone else to talk about. The honorary Octostomp fight, Fry, the Eel Deal. Commanding an empty Octostomp shell, Fry charms groups of eels to attack for her. By shooting certain eels back at Fry, her balance will be thrown off, causing the Octostomp shell to stop spinning and leaving her vulnerable. Each phase introduces 1 or 2 dances, aka attack patterns, for the eels. The first dance has the eels rain down from above, the second has them spiral outward from the center of the stage, the third has them fire ink from their mouths, and the final dance has them travel in a quickly moving swarm, attempting to hit the player. If you don't manage to deflect all of the masked eels in one go, she will use the dances from the previous phases again, or attack by moving the Octostomp husk, attempting to run the player over. This is a solid structure for a fight, and shooting flying eels is a unique enough way to deal damage. But I personally don't find the actual mechanics of these attacks to be all that fun. Fry rolling around on the Octostomp husk is pretty cool, and I like that you can squid roll parry it for some reason. The counterplay to Moray Whirlpool, on the other hand, pretty much comes down to standing still and holding down the trigger, or going into the middle of the spiral where they will literally never hit you. The Eel Downpour and 100 Eel Vision attacks are at least a good opportunity to use a splashdown, but there isn't really a way to mess this up. They serve as chances to deal damage, but they barely feel like attacks you need to dodge. The final dance, Great Moray Transformation, feels like it's begging for you to time a splashdown right as the eels pass. And you can, but if you time it to destroy as many as possible, you'll always end up getting hit by one of them, breaking your armor. It's just kinda weird. This is a fast strat for the final phase, like it totally works, but the game punishes you for attempting it, which feels like an oversight. On a positive note, the visuals are pretty great. Fry's arena, while not really complementing the aesthetics of her fight, looks pretty fantastic, with giant amps, CRT screens, and neon lights. It looks like it would have belonged better in the Deep Sea Metro than Alterna, to be honest, but in a vacuum, it's definitely a cool look. Fry and her eels feature some exceptional animation, especially at the start of each phase. There's a lot of subtle camera work going on in these cinematics that helps make them feel more dynamic and exciting than those from the previous two games. Once again, it's worth noting that the members of Deep Cut actually talk, which helps give them a lot more personality compared to the robotic bosses. Fry's presentation is even more impressive than Big Man's, and I would argue the fight has a more distinct visual identity. But when it comes to the gameplay, I can't help but feel like I've seen all of this before. 100 Eel Vision? Well, that's just Octomaw's Teeth Attack. Eel Downpour? That's just Tenna Missiles. Each phase ends with the player inking a big cube, climbing on top, and dealing a hit, just like the 3 other Octostomp fights. Whether it's a reskinned multiplayer weapon or an attack taken from another fight, Fry's mechanics feature a surprising amount of copy and pasting. The result is an amalgam of previous bosses that, despite its stylish coat of paint, doesn't feel especially unique or inspired. The attacks that are unique are either 1, underwhelming, or 2, kinda confusing and unpolished. And something about this whole dynamic just feels odd to me. It doesn't feel like I'm fighting Fry as much as I'm doing some aim training on a bunch of eels. In fact, maybe it would have been better if you actually did have to aim the eels, rather than them launching themselves into Fry automatically. That would require you to keep track of Fry's position, rather than how the fight currently is, where you're just kinda meant to ignore her until she becomes vulnerable. Speaking of that, I also think the fight could have benefited from not reusing the Octostomp shell, as nothing meaningful is really even done with it besides making this feel even more like a game I've already played. Between the lack of challenge, the mismatched visuals of the arena, and its similarities to other encounters, Fry's boss fight just feels a little off. Still, it has good variety in attacks, great animations, and solid music. It's definitely on the lower end of bosses for me, but there's enough here to appreciate that I think this placement makes sense. Jumping back to Octo Expansion, we have Octostomp Redux. This version takes after the Octo Canyon design Neo Octostomp, using an ink-resistant coat to protect itself. Right off the bat, the boss will attack more quickly and frequently than its Splatoon 1 counterpart. In between avoiding attacks, the player also now has to deal damage to the buckle on its front to remove the coat. Once the coat is dealt with, Redux has another trick up its sleeve. After face planting, bubbles are fired from all 4 sides, making the boss harder to ink and dealing damage if the player passes through them. Now that these mechanics have been introduced, Phase 2 begins not only with 3 buckles to destroy rather than 1, but also more bubbles, blown from the boss's mouth and shot at by a turret that pops out of its head. This turret attack also comes from Neo Octostomp, but here, rather than just shooting at the player, it synergizes with the bubbles, popping them to deal damage, ink turf, and potentially trigger a chain reaction. I should probably mention that these bubbles are taken directly from a Splatoon 2 multiplayer special, Bubble Blower. But unlike Big Man, who just reused assets pretty much verbatim, and Fry, who had unique visuals for the attack but didn't really change how it worked mechanically, this is only one of Octostomp Redux's attacks, and it's used to complement the existing design. I don't really have an issue with reskinning elements from PvP as long as they're incorporated in a meaningful way. The third phase pulls from the Neo fight one more time by having Octostomp grow 2 additional faces, increasing the area covered by its main attack. Combined with the boss's improved movement compared to the Splatoon 1 battle, this can actually be pretty scary, with Redux quickly sliding along the ground, sweeping a wide area with its faces, or charging up a massive jump across the entire arena. This is where I'd like to bring up the weapon options the player is given. Dually Squelchers are easily the optimal pick, as the solid range allows you to hit each of the boss's weak points with little trouble, and the dodge rolls allow you to cleanly slide out of harm's way. The Bamboozler is similarly capable of shooting the buckles from a distance, though it has to rely on curling bombs for quicker movement. Last is the Squeezer, which plays pretty similar to the previous weapon, only it's a bit harder to use due to requiring the player to mash the trigger. I like that the player is given the choice to forego dodge rolls, as that makes the fight more distinct from Octo Canyons while also adding a new wrinkle of difficulty. In fact, I want to say there isn't really a wrong choice here, but the weapon you pick may contribute to my biggest grievance with this boss. It's surprisingly tanky. I don't have a problem with long boss fights as long as they continue to develop in interesting ways, or raise the difficulty to keep up the tension. This fight, however, just goes on for a little too long in my opinion. The new elements it introduces are very well done, and I appreciate how much ink control the boss manages to hold over the arena, but because Octostomp is a boss that requires you to constantly spend time dodging out of the way, I think the buckles having as much HP as they do is a bit overkill. A lot of the fight is spent repositioning so that you'll be able to hit the boss after its attack. With the dualies, this is fairly simple, but with the other options, it can begin to feel tedious, especially in the third phase where your windows to counterattack become much smaller. It's not anywhere near as painful as the Octo Samurai rematch, but it does go on for longer than I personally think is warranted. Spectacle-wise, it gets the job done. It's sanitized Octostomp. I'm pretty sure the terrain is reused from Octo Canyon, and the skybox is used in other parts of Octo Expansion, but the boss itself still looks and sounds pretty good. It even gets a new roar to indicate when it's about to do a massive jump. There's nothing too special about the presentation, but nothing that stands out as bad either. Identity is kind of hard for this one. It pulls most of its design from other campaigns, but also introduces some new moves that recontextualize the gameplay in interesting ways. And I do like that the series leans into Octostomp being a recurring boss that just doesn't know when to quit, so I'm actually going to give it a decent score. Overall, this boss does some things better than the original and other things worse. The ways in which Redux evolves the gameplay of the fight puts it just above for me, but as they are very similar bosses at their core, it's a pretty close race between the Octostomps. And rounding off the Octostomp quintet, we have Neo Octostomp. You know, in Octo Canyon, they refer to Octostomp like he's a single character, but in Octo Expansion, Cuttlefish implies there are multiple. So which one is it, Nintendo? Is this a species? A machine? One specific guy? Did Fry kill him? Anyway, the boss. Imagine Octostomp Redux, but it doesn't take 10 years to kill it. Also, you have the regular Splat dualies, which means you're gonna have to get a bit more close and personal. The first phase actually has no gimmick at all. It's identical to Splatoon 1's Octostomp, only it charges forward quickly rather than hobbling around. Phase 2 is when it gets the coat and starts to use the turret attack. The close-range dualies honestly make breaking the buckle a lot more tense, since you have to be well within face-smashing range to deal consistent damage. Phase 3 gives Neo the additional faces, adding more range to its charge and faceplant attacks, but still only requiring one buckle to be broken. Climbing the boss to reach the weak point does feel a little simple after fighting Redux, but honestly, I just find the pacing of this fight more fun. The bubbles were a cool idea, but can feel a bit jank, and really just end up extending the phase where the boss is already weakened. Neo is my favorite Octostomp fight, because it forces you to react to more threatening attacks, but also rewards aggressive play by letting you get through the fight quickly, rather than dragging out what is admittedly a pretty simple boss without much depth. Sometimes the simple version is the best, and like the boss itself, I'm gonna leave it at that. Short and sweet. Whew. Finally, we get to talk about a boss that isn't a cube. I'll be straightforward with you. I don't really know where to rank Octoma. When I first started making this list, I thought it would place pretty high, as I've always remembered it being one of my favorite parts of Splatoon 1. But once it came to actually evaluating the fight, I realized it didn't have as much going for it as I had once thought. The Ravenous Octomaw is the last of the standard Octo weapons, a massive fish-like robot that attempts to swallow you whole. Swimming across the ground, it will target the player and trap them within its massive teeth. The player has to quickly smash through and swim out of the way before the titular maw clamps shut and eats you. You'll probably figure this out in time, but if you don't, failure results in instant death. After the Octomaw chomps down, the player is given another opportunity to fire away at its teeth. This reveals a circular hole that serves as the boss's throat, and the perfect place to chuck a bomb. Doing so stuns the boss, causing it to sink back down and revealing its weak point. The second phase begins with Octomaw growing a new set of teeth, all of which are more durable than before. This makes it more difficult to escape its jaws in time and to smash a big enough gap to throw a bomb. Phase 3 sees an even stronger set, this time made of gold, once again requiring more damage to break. Here's where I had some trouble deciding how to rank this fight. See, the way I've always liked to play this boss is by destroying every one of the Octoma's teeth. This not only makes the fight a bit more difficult and lengthy, but also guarantees that you'll see this attack, where the boss swims away and fires the remaining teeth from its mouth like missiles. The robotic fangs hover in the air, open up with this slick animation, and fire shots of ink at the player. They can still be shot down in this state, but it's a cool twist that adds some variety to the final phase. There's just something about this attack that I've always found really cool and satisfying, especially the way the teeth fly right back into the boss's mouth afterwards. The thing is, you don't have to do that. The win condition is simply having enough space to throw a bomb down the boss's throat, and even with a level 1 hero shot, it's not too hard to do that without seeing the special attack at all. Not to mention, I already compared this attack to one of Fry's, where I complained about it being too easy, so it would be pretty hypocritical to turn around and act like it's good when Octomod does it. I think it's mostly the visuals that I find appealing here, but yeah, gameplay-wise, it's just fine. And while the fight is mostly about the counterplay of shooting the teeth, there are only 2 attacks, one of which some players might not even see. A small number of attacks doesn't always mean a boss is bad. Again, sometimes simplicity is the right way to go. But returning to this fight after experiencing the entire Splatoon series, I do find myself wishing there was a bit more going on. Maybe the Octoma should have tried to eat you multiple times in one phase, before making itself vulnerable, or had multiple variations of the flying teeth. Just one more wrinkle could have done a lot. So I'm a little torn, but I don't think I can give Octoma a very high score for its mechanics. The fight is really cool, and even in its simplicity, I would consider it a step up from Octo Valley's first 3 bosses. However, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny as well as I thought before attempting to scrutinize it. Moving along, I really like the look of this arena, with the massive pipes spewing out purple ink. There's even some unique audio for this area when the fight isn't taking place, adding to the ominous atmosphere. I love these little signs placed around the arena saying not to throw a bomb into Octoma's mouth. It's obviously a gameplay hint for how to beat the boss, but it almost feels like it could make sense in universe. It's fun to imagine what the story might be behind it. I also really like the look of the boss itself. I'm glad it broke the trend of having giant cartoony eyes, as I think it ends up looking a bit more creepy and intimidating this way, fitting for a penultimate boss. The fact that it can submerge and swim through the ink just like the player is really cool, and the visual effects and sound design make escaping the jaw feel tense and exciting. I didn't mention it until now, but Octo Weaponry is a pretty great track that encapsulates the alien robot aesthetic of the great Octo Weapons perfectly. Most Splatoon boss themes are high energy, but more upbeat and fun. Octo Weaponry is imposing and intimidating. It really sells the bosses as a threat, and gives each encounter a fitting level of gravitas. Octomod definitely has a solid identity, feeling much more organic than the other robotic bosses, with very unique ways of dealing and taking damage. It likely inspired the design of Moz from Salmon Run, but back in Splatoon 1, this was a one-of-a-kind threat. It may be overshadowed by more impressive bosses today, but at the time, this fight was one of the best. Ultimately, Octoma is not the most jaw-dropping fight, but it is one I always enjoy. I wouldn't be surprised if some of you think I was too generous with its score, but I couldn't in good faith place it any lower than this. Given the choice between any boss we've talked about so far and Octoma, I would choose Octoma. Saying that, this is probably the most vibes-based of any of my rankings, but I do think, balancing against my own nostalgia, this is a fair place for it to end up. Sometimes you just have to wonder what goes on inside the beautiful minds at Nintendo. I personally cannot conceive a series of events that would lead to the creation of a boss that is part octopus, part toaster oven, but it sure does exist. In terms of iconic status, I feel like Octostomp has always overshadowed Splatoon 2's introductory boss, the Octo Oven. And that's kinda strange, because the more I think about it, the more I realize this fight is a direct evolution of Octostomp in almost every way. What do I mean by that? Well, similar to Octostomp, the fight begins with the boss approaching the player and attacking, forcing you to dodge to the side. Only rather than a single slam, the oven fires out multiple attacks back to back, before charging up and ejecting all of its loaves at once. Reaching the weak point is a matter of platforming up the side of the boss. Only this time, the player must ink and climb first onto a loaf, then up to the top. Phase 2 complicates this process by throwing in columns of ink that make dodging attacks trickier, and by limiting the surfaces you can ink, ink, forcing you to jump between loaves while climbing. Phase 3 introduces an entirely new attack that forces you to rotate around the arena as it coats the battlefield in enemy ink. Plus, the available climbing space shrinks even further, with the loaves now wearing armor. Land the third hit, and it's over. The fight isn't the most thrilling, but if the goal was to design a boss like Octostomp that tests the player on their ability to dodge quick attacks and platform under a time limit, I would say the Octo Oven more than understood the assignment. One element of this fight that may seem like a downside is the fact that you're forced to use the pathetic level 1 hero shot. But while I have in the past lamented this weapon's sluggish fire rate and poor inking abilities, and their ill effects on the pacing of Sector 1's regular stages, I actually don't think it's all that bad in this context. Not only would a stronger gun make this fight trivial, but I would argue the slow fire rate aligns well with the speed of the oven's attacks, contributing to a consistent gameplay flow. The boss is easy, but it still keeps you locked into a continuous pattern of inking and swimming, a state that would be harder to achieve if the weapon were more powerful. This especially applies to the glazing machine attack that inks the arena, as the boss is actually given a chance to build control of the map. Octo Oven is meant to be a tutorial boss, and I think it does a better job of teaching a player how to platform and hold space with their ink than any version of Octostomp. It serves its role well, and without feeling too basic. Visually, it's a toaster oven. Don't know why, but hey, I remember playing this boss for the first time when I was like 15 and finding that hilarious. And nowadays, I'm mostly just confused, but I can respect the commitment to the joke if nothing else. Credit to the localizers too, like all of the dialogue in this fight is either bread puns or some attempt to associate the boss's attacks with bread-related things, like Marie referring to the ink sticks as churros and the shower attack as a glazing machine. Yeah, this fight is stupid, but it knows it. The graphics are pretty detailed too. I like how after the first phase, the oven transforms, gaining pseudo eyes and air vents at the top that almost look like horns. It's also cute that the faces on the loaves of the bread react with a little sound if you shoot at them. The backdrop is notably bright for what is presumably still an underground setting, but a less creepy arena for a goofy boss does make sense, and it stands out from the rest of Octo Canyon. When it comes to music, this marks the first, and in my opinion the most fitting use of Octarmaments, Splatoon 2's generic boss theme. While it does get a bit overplayed by the end of the base campaign and Octo expansion, this is honestly a really great track that keeps the tension high while also highlighting the sillier side of these fights with vocal accents. Compared to the oppressive Octo weaponry, these fun elements reflect Octo Canyon's more lighthearted tone, while the use of the onward motif solidifies it as a distinctly Octarian theme. It's a good mix of old and new, and if we were going to hear any boss theme 8 times, I'm glad it's this one. Now, I did say this boss tends to get overshadowed by others, and on some level, I guess I'm glad the most iconic Octarian killing machine isn't the sentient bread. But from my own perspective, this fight is extremely memorable, if for just how dumb of a concept it is. I also have a soft spot for big bosses that you climb on top of, even if this one is mechanically pretty simple. For me, it's at least on par with Octostomp in this category. That gives us a nicely balanced score for the oven. It doesn't excel in any category, but it serves as a solid start to Octo Canyon with simple yet effective gameplay and a weird but fun visual theme. Thankfully, getting right into the sanitized version of the fight means I shouldn't have to repeat myself too much. The Octo Oven XXL is in fact not larger than the regular one, but it is the only Octoboss rematch I actually prefer over the original. Compared to the other refights, there's not really a gimmick here. It's basically just Octo Oven turned up to 11, with sprinklers, splash walls, and enemies spawned on top of it. This maybe isn't the most creative way to reuse a boss, but in execution, it's actually really fun. Phase 1 keeps it basic with just a few Octo Troopers thrown in, though these are the kind that bounce their shots along the ground, so they synergize well with the boss by raining fire down on you from above and can be pretty dangerous while you're climbing up. Phase 2 is where the most notable change kicks in, the absurd amount of ink the oven puts on the ground. Pretty much no other boss can compete with the level of map control this thing holds over its arena. 4 sprinklers placed on the side of a mobile boss can cover a lot of ground in no time, and combined with the ink sticks, the arena becomes very green very fast. You can shoot and destroy the sprinklers like usual, which introduces some additional counterplay, but of course the main goal is still just to climb up the loaves. Awaiting your arrival this time are some speedy octocopters and an octo bomber, which is nothing to sneeze at, especially when fought on mostly uninkable terrain. You can choose to focus the enemies first, or just target the tentacle and hope for the best. Phase 3 is next, and not only do the sprinklers from the last phase respawn, but the weak point is now guarded by 3 snipers hiding behind splash walls. This phase is the most affected by which weapon you choose for the fight, so here's where I'll talk about your options. Jet Squelcher is the obvious pick, since its long range makes taking out sprinklers a breeze, and allows you to whittle away at splash walls from the ground. Plus, Curling Bomb is the perfect getaway tool when you need to cut a path through enemy ink. There's a reason this is the choice with the smallest reward. Rapid Blaster Pro is a step up in difficulty. While its range is comparable to Jet's, you'll have to be a bit more careful with your shots, as the blaster's end lag could leave you getting smacked by a loaf if you aren't careful. A skillful Splat Bomb can reach the roof of the oven to take out enemies early, but you lose out on a helpful movement tool. Last is Octo Brush, which is the hardest for obvious reasons, but also comes with its own advantages. No Curling Bomb is required when you can run right through enemy ink, and you do still have a ranged option with your Burst Bomb, which can notably hit the snipers over or around their walls. Though again, with the brush's mobility, you might be better off just weaving around their sights. The Glazing attack ensures that all 3 weapons will test you on your ability to multitask, keeping an eye on sniper lines and lethal loaves while painting a path around the arena. Once again, none of these weapons have exceptional painting power, so dodging attacks and staying alive can be a genuine challenge. Overall, I really like these choices. They all actually feel like distinct playstyles to tackle the fight with, and the difficulty to reward ratio feels a lot more relevant than the other bosses that used it. All in all, it's a solid upgrade for a good boss that ends up feeling like the right kind of enemy spam. As expected, the visuals are not too far off the original oven. However, the loaves now feature a marbled texture, resembling the look of sanitized ink and marbled bread. It amazes me in just how many ways this design actually does make sense. While the purple ink in the first fight resembled jelly, I guess, dialogue from Pearl suggests that the sanitized ink is meant to look like kiwi jam. That's a bit of a stretch, but sure. The best way I can describe this spectacle is commitment to the bit, and you know, I respect it. What the boss lacks in identity due to being a clone, I honestly think it makes up for in its oppressive ink control and overwhelming enemy spawns. Were this boss a little less finely tuned, it could have been very annoying, but it strikes a solid level of difficulty without ever feeling totally unmanageable. Combined with just enough flavor in the visuals and dialogue, I'd say it stands out about as much as the original fight. Octo Oven XXL is a slight upgrade in most respects, and not enough to raise it a whole number score in any category, but an improvement nonetheless. While most of Octo Expansion's rematches kind of missed the mark in my opinion, this one plays it straight with a simple difficulty bump, a bit of extra counterplay and player choice, and a new coat of paint. Works for me. Number 15, the pinging
Márchale.
This elusive bounder, as it is called, is in some ways similar to Octowhirl. While the methods of dealing damage are much more straightforward, there's a lot more going on in this fight. First, let's talk about physics.
Márchale.
Is pretty much a giant, floaty infinity ball, one of Side Order's regular objectives. Shooting at it with your weapon will knock it back, causing it to start rolling and bouncing around the arena. Dotted across the battlefield are a number of bumpers that deal big damage, but also send the bounder flying. The fight is about wrangling the boss, chasing it down and dealing damage while you can. Big Bounder isn't just a passive sponge though, it has a charge attack similar to Octowhirl's that targets the player as well as making it temporarily invincible, and when fought on floor 20 it will leave suction bombs in its trail and generate shockwaves every time it bounces. It will also spit out splat bombs, varying in number depending on the floor, and will sometimes fire killer whale beams from its mouths. On top of all of that, you also have to deal with the usual hordes of gelatins, including battering lentos who aggro onto the boss and knock it away, as well as homing arpeggios who will hunt you down and explode. The Side Order ironically has some of the most chaotic bosses of all, and you may be wondering why I placed this one so low when a lack of complexity has been one of my main criticisms so far. There are a lot of layers to this fight, literally and figuratively. So what makes it number 15? To be brutally honest, this boss is just kind of annoying. First of all, dealing damage is a bit counterintuitive. The bumpers send the boss into the air, preventing you from shooting at it. So at first, I thought it made more sense to avoid the bumpers and just aim for the weak points on either side. But as it turns out, that will only drag the fight out way longer than it needs to be. Once you understand that pushing it into the bumpers intentionally cracks open its shell, allowing for critical damage, and that certain specials are especially good at taking it out mid-flight, it becomes significantly more manageable. But even then, a lot of this fight is going to force you to wait. Wait for the boss to fall back down after being blasted into the sky. Wait for the invincible attack to end. Wait for the lentos to quit playing keep away. It's very easy for the bounder to be just out of reach before getting knocked away again and again and again. Especially for a boss in side order, where many floors can be completed in under 10 seconds, mastery of this boss isn't all that satisfying, because no matter what, part of the fight is always going to boil down to holding forward to chase it across the entire arena. Longer range weapons can make juggling the boss a bit easier, but there's no quick kill strategy here besides stacking a ton of damage buffs. I guess the homing shots chip can be helpful as well to make sure you're consistently dealing critical damage, but an overpowered charger is pretty much just the objectively best build in side order generally. It's probably not something you would use with only this boss in mind, so I don't know how much credit I can really give it there. I do think it's really cool that, rather than having standard phases, you break off the bounder's outer shells over the course of the fight. But that also means the boss's issues are only exacerbated as time goes on, since these smaller forms are even more prone to being flung halfway across the world. On that note, let's talk about the visual design of
Marchale.
Allegedly, it's meant to look like a sea urchin, which explains some of the arena's background decor. The arena itself is actually pretty stunning, with these massive walls on either side bordering a starry night sky. I like that the boss has two little faces on either side, but when you crack open its shell, there are tons of hidden eyes that get exposed. It's kinda creepy and cute at the same time. It's also nice that each of the three forms look distinct from one another for the sake of clarity. Apparently, there's actually some food theming going on here. The devs talked about it in an interview, and I think I'm just not Japanese enough to get the joke. But yeah, sure, the boss has pudding and rice inside it, and the bumpers are filled with soy sauce. Why not? Despite that aspect being lost on me, there's definitely a strong presentation here. The bounder is vaguely similar in appearance to the Octo Whirl, but that actually could make sense in universe, as Marina helped upgrade the Great Octo weapons and she created the Memverse. Once again, we have a unique music track in Cold Storage. It's probably my least favorite boss theme in side order, to be honest, but it still goes hard and does a good job of matching the energy of the battle. Something kind of interesting about side order's boss tracks is that they reintroduced the Onward motif from Splatoon 1 and 2's hero modes after it was absent in Splatoon 3's campaign, and you can bet that the part where it appears is pretty much always the best part of the song. Does this boss have its own identity? Visually, kinda. We do have lots of big robots in Splatoon, and we already had one with a similar silhouette, but its arena and the unique mechanic of breaking off multiple layers do a good job of distinguishing it. Really though, it's the gameplay that gives this boss its character. No other fight has anything close to this dynamic, even if it's remembered for some of the wrong reasons. In general, after 4 campaigns consisting mostly of hit the weak point 3 times to win, side order's bosses feel refreshing and streamlined. So even with my grievances taken into account, it's worth appreciating what the bounder does differently. In theory, the pinging
Marchale
has all the makings of a great fight. A variety of methods to weaken and damage it, respectable difficulty and complexity, and a very pretty arena. It's just not something I think works very well in a roguelite setting, and it can feel like an unlucky slog in a mode with otherwise very tight pacing. The Octobot King 2, a boss that nowadays is often seen as a disappointing end to an underwhelming campaign. but I don't think that's completely fair. On many levels, yes, this is just a worse version of Splatoon 1's final boss, but if you're gonna rip off any Splatoon boss, you can do a lot worse than the Octobot King. The same DNA that makes the first fight great can still be found here, albeit significantly watered down. The basic loop of the fight remains. DJ Octavio, from inside a flying DJ booth/mech, launches fists at the player, which can be damaged with ink to deflect them back. After being bopped by enough fists, Octavio himself will fall out of the mech, allowing the player to deal a hit and end the phase. Already, there are a few changes from the Splatoon 1 Octobot encounter. Initially, it may seem like you need to deflect a fist before it hits you or hits the ground. In fact, this was the case in Splatoon 1, giving the attack a nice sense of tension, with the fist slowing down as it clashed against your fire. The projectiles got faster and faster throughout the original fight, meaning it could actually get pretty difficult to deal enough damage before the attack landed and you lost your chance. But in Splatoon 2, this isn't how it works. If the fist lands on the ground, or even if it hits you, you still have a brief window to fill it up with ink and launch it back. I personally really don't like this change. Deflecting the fist mid-air felt like a last-second parry of Octavio's attack. Shooting them off the ground is just kinda weird. Visually, it just doesn't make as much sense, and gameplay-wise, it makes the whole fight needlessly easy. And you're even given another crutch. A fist that you failed to send back will retain the damage it took, making it entirely trivial to deflect it the next time. In Splat 1, a fist landing without being deflected meant a failed opportunity, but provided you moved out of the way, it's not like it would kill you. It was never all that punishing in the first place, so I don't really understand why Splatoon 2 makes it so much more lenient. This is the final boss after all. It should be okay to take the training wheels off at this point. So yeah, the fist attacks aren't all that exciting. Don't worry though, the others are marginally better. It begins with Callie's Splat Bomb Rush. I definitely think there are more interesting ways they could have integrated Callie into the fight, but she is literally singing the song Bomb Rush Blush, so I guess this makes enough sense. Gameplay-wise, it's just a bunch of bombs, so nothing crazy. Swim out of the way and you're good. Later in the fight, these are upgraded to Suction Bombs, which I think have a bigger radius, but it's honestly hard to tell. The Octobot then starts moving around the arena more erratically, first by raising up into the air, and later by boosting from side to side and throwing out fists more often. This doesn't really change much since the fists home in on your location and home in on Octavio after being deflected. I think the idea was that you would have to keep your camera focused on the Octobot, but you're given a lot of time to simply rotate 90 degrees. It's kinda funny, like the dialogue tries to make it sound like Octavio is doing new moves. Whoa, look out for the dash punch, and then he just moves slightly to the left. The first actually interesting change is that Octavio will now sometimes throw out a spinning drill attack, which cannot be deflected and must instead be dodged. This at least requires the player to pay attention, and it's telegraphed well with a wind-up animation and sound effect. As the fight progresses, Octavio will sometimes launch both fists at you simultaneously, which honestly makes them easier to shoot back sometimes. The double drill attack is more threatening, but has the exact same counterplay of swimming to the side. The next attack has the Octobot charging forward, raining down a wide path of ink in its wake. This is a move stolen straight up from the Octo Shower. You know, the boss you fought right before this one, so that's a little awkward. To me, it feels like they realized Octavio has basically zero tools to actually put enemy ink on the floor, so they threw this in to incorporate some idea of map control into the fight, but yeah, can't give it a whole lot of credit there. Last for this phase is the most confusing move in the DJ's arsenal. This attack, which Marie refers to as his calamari bombs, despite the fact that they are obviously takoyaki. Basically, a bunch of projectiles are launched from Octavio's booth, landing randomly across the arena. After a few seconds, they will transform into spiraling tentacle pillars and just kinda sit there. They deal damage if you walk into them, but I don't think any person has ever actually managed to do that on accident. This arena is huge. Most of Octavio's attacks don't even force you to move, and most of these obstacles won't even have a chance to spawn, since you can destroy them as they're falling down and even for a brief window after they've landed. I'm really not sure what the idea was here. This might be the most useless attack in the entire series. And I forgot to mention, but this fight actually has a Sheldon request. Despite this being being the final boss and it working just as well with any of the 9 hero weapons, for some reason the first time you fight it, you're forced to use the hero shot. Not only does this feel like an unnecessary restriction of player choice, but that also gives this boss the big man problem, where if you have the shot upgraded to the maximum level, it makes it stupidly easy. Seriously, the painting power alone is ridiculous. You barely have to enter squid form during this fight. After enough hits, Octavio falls out, you launch him back in, bada bing, bada boom, boss fight done. So, right now it probably sounds like I'm not a big fan of this one. And yeah, gameplay-wise, I'm not. Here's the thing though. I think the developers knew this wasn't anything all that crazy. They knew it was a recycled fight from the first game with some gimmicks and borrowed attacks. But you can tell the focus of this fight really isn't on the gameplay. This boss is all about the spectacle, and the spectacle is really good. I'm not gonna act like it hasn't been outdone by every final boss since, but you know what? For the time, this was pretty cool. If you were a Splatoon 1 veteran, you can't tell me you read Bomb Rush Blush Tide Goes Out as the mission name and didn't soyjack point at your screen a little. We enter the fight from the center of Cephalon HQ, a dark pit flooded with purple ink, surrounded by Octotech and flying saucers. We descend a shaft in the middle of the sector, a steel bulkhead closing behind us. Dropping onto the spawn point, we're greeted by a massive Octarian crowd, chanting. The same chant heard as each of the 4 previous bosses appeared. We super jump into the arena and the audience erupts into chaos, clapping and cheering as we approach a strange machine. Standing in front of it is Callie, wearing a sleek outfit and a pair of sunglasses. Revealing herself with a dramatic turnaround, she calls out to DJ Octavio. In a burst of golden light, the platform rises out of the ink, revealing both the stolen Great Zapfish and the new, but not really improved, Octobot King. Now, I'll be real, Callie being brainwashed by a pair of sunglasses instead of genuinely betraying Marie to help Octavio was pretty lame and disappointing. Yes, I know about the relationship chart, and I would love to believe there's something more interesting going on here, especially taking into account these Squid Sister stories, but if there is, the game doesn't acknowledge it. For all intents and purposes, Callie is just being mind-controlled by Octavio during this fight. And while that's not the worst idea for a boss, it definitely feels like they could have taken more of a risk here with the narrative and gotten more out of these characters. There isn't really an emotional takeaway from this finale besides Marie cares about Callie, and that's nice, it's just frankly not that interesting. But we aren't quite there yet. Before anything else, we need to talk about the music, because the soundtrack for this boss is easily 100% the best part about it. I already mentioned the title of the mission, Bomb Rush Blush Tide Goes Out. What I didn't say is that these are the names of Callie and Marie's solo songs that were released around the time of Splatoon 1's final Splatfest. They're the only Squid Sister songs to feature one of the cousins but not the other. In this way, Bomb Rush Blush represents Callie and Tide Goes Out represents Marie. And Splatoon 2 uses this association to score the narrative of its final boss. The first song of the fight is Bomb Rush Blush by DJ Octavio featuring Callie. Not only did he remix her mind, but he stole her theme, transforming it with orchestral stings, chopped vocals, and even mixing in the signature Octarian leitmotif, the same way he does for all the music he produces. The result is an intimidating, corrupted version of the song, turning a bubbly pop anthem into a dramatic, villainous march. And that's only the first track. After phase 2, we get a cutscene. Sheldon flies in, driving one of the trucks that Callie and Marie used to perform on in Inkopolis Plaza. Riding on top is Marie, wielding her first-generation hero charger. She fires a shot directly at Callie's face, knocking the hypno shades clean off. Callie is now stunned, torn between Octavio's control and Marie's plea to come to her senses. The momentum of the battle shifts, and the music follows in turn. Now playing is Title Rush, a track that blends the melodies of the Squid Sisters' 2 songs, and both of their voices, but still with DJ Octavio's stylistic instrumentation. This is one of the best songs in the Splatoon franchise, and I will never let anyone tell me otherwise. Title Rush is so well composed, in fact, that I would even say it helps make up for the lackluster narrative. Marie wants to save her cousin Callie. It's a simple story, but in this piece, you can feel the emotional weight of what that actually means to her. Hear her voice cry out in the hope that it will save her family. It turns a basic scene into something a bit more powerful. By the way, I lied. The fight doesn't end after just 3 phases. Upon the 3rd hit, Callie finally snaps out of Octavio's control. Marie begins playing a song on a boombox, and I'm pretty sure you know which one it is. With the Squid Sisters reunited, we cut back down to Agent 4 as a drone flies on screen. Turns out, Sheldon has one last request for us, a modded version of the Rainmaker that fires long-distance ink missiles. Using a launch pad to follow after Octavio, we land on a grind rail ring at the top of the arena. With the lights shining and the music blaring all around us, we have to dodge, shoot, and deflect our way through one last phase, backed by the spicy Calamari incantation. It's a simple phase in terms of gameplay. This is clearly meant to be more of a victory lap than anything else, but it is a fun moment, and the soundtrack elevates this finale into a cathartic showdown. Sustaining critical damage, the Octobot King falls to the ground, and we're led to the center of the arena to finish off the DJ himself with a Rainmaker slam dunk. A fitting final touch for a flashy fight. With all of that said, does this boss have a unique identity? Yes and no. The gameplay absolutely holds it back from a perfect score. And not only is it fundamentally a clone of the previous game's final challenge, but one that feels greatly watered down, with less attacks at its disposal. Rather than having a unique arena, like every other final boss, Octobot 2 takes place in the default big flat circle. That circle does look pretty unique, serving as a massive concert hall full of Octarians, and for some reason looking like the center of Inkopolis Plaza, but functionally it's nothing special. And even the finale, which I do enjoy, makes this one of 3 fights that conclude with the incantation, which, especially at the time, was just another thing that made it feel like a diet version of Splatoon 1's ending. However, the strength of DJ Octavio as a funny character with genuinely interesting lore, the bond between Callie and Marie, and the presentation, down to new outfits, arena decor, and flashy cutscenes, all culminate into a very memorable finale. The fight features some of the most iconic music in the series. 3 unique tracks, all of which are excellent, is much more than most bosses can offer, and gives the boss a distinct emotional appeal. And the boss's final phase, while mostly serving as a victory lap, is wholly original and pretty fun. I honestly think, even with its flaws and its copied homework, Octobot 2 manages to carve its own identity as a set-piece and narrative moment in Splatoon's history. Realistically, this fight is all in on presentation, with the gameplay left feeling underdeveloped. And I don't blame anyone for finding that disappointing. I agree that it is. But I do think this spectacle, especially the music, is worth appreciating. It elevates an underwhelming fight into something much greater, and gives characters core to the series' identity a moment to shine. I don't think Octobot 2 has aged well in the memory of most Splatoon fans, and it is the lowest ranking final boss on this list, but I have a bit of a soft spot for Octo Canyon, with this fight being a big reason why. In the end, I may have scored it higher than most players would, but if you ask me, this is the spot it deserves. Also, I didn't have anywhere else to put this, but only in this version of the Octavio fight, rather than flying towards the Octobot regardless of what direction you shoot him from, Octavio will actually get knocked back and then calculate a trajectory back to the mech, meaning you can shoot him backwards and he'll just get like magnetically pulled through the air, and I think this is very funny. Okay, next boss. Yes, I honestly think the Splatoon 3 tutorial boss is better than Splatoon 2's final boss. Is that a little sad? Probably, but it's true. While the series' boss fights have overall had their highs and lows, the Splatoon team seems to only get better at crafting introductory battles. The mechanics here are simple, as you would expect, but they feel notably polished and refined. And I would hope they are, considering this is the 3rd Octobot fight in the series. Saying that, it somehow feels fresher this time around than in Splatoon 2. Octavio attacks with his typical punches, which must be shot at in order to deflect them. They fly just fast enough and have just enough HP to make launching them back attack feel satisfying without being too difficult for this early point in the game. Drill attacks also return from Octobot 2, serving as invincible projectiles that force the player to dodge, though they can now be inked after landing. Like the Splatoon 2 fight, each phase ends with Octavio falling out of the mech, with the player needing to shoot him back in to deal a hit. Phase 2 is where the fight begins to stand out. Octavio's mech is now equipped with an ink vac, one of the multiplayer specials new to Splatoon 3. He first uses this to reset control of the arena by sucking up all the ink, but it's not just a cutscene trick. Just like in PvP, Octavio's vacuum can nullify your shots by sucking them out of the air. While it's active, his fists are immune to being deflected. Additionally, the mech will fire out a return shot, varying in size depending on how much ink the mech took in. That is, until you throw Small Fry into the vacuum's vortex. Your little buddy is just big enough to clog the vacuum, once again allowing you to fight back. Octavio isn't done yet. He'll jump around the arena to fire from other angles, and throw out a new type of hand attack. The Octobot slaps the ground with an open palm, sending out a shockwave that the player must jump over. Phase 3 is a simple evolution of the previous, with more movement from the mech, more frequent attacks, another vacuum, and one last beating for Octavio. Is it the most mind-blowing boss ever? No, not really, but it's absolutely a case of they didn't need to go this hard. This fight against the Octobot is surprisingly creative for its third appearance, with some really clever integration of 2 new specials, including the Wavebreaker Shockwave, and in my opinion, the best use of Small Fry in any boss. Something else that's surprisingly impressive about this fight, the presentation is kind of amazing. It begins with this fantastic intro cutscene where Octavio soars into the Splatlands in his mech, slides down the rocky edge of the crater, then lands dramatically at the bottom before accusing Cuttlefish for the disappearance of his army. Cuttlefish sends forward the new Agent 3 before Octavio steals the spotlight right back, spinning his tracks and dropping his title card. Not only is the arena seamlessly integrated into the environment, with the fight taking place at the bottom of the crater, but Octavio's mech kicks up a sandstorm, making for a great dynamic backdrop to the battle. This is one of the more striking set pieces in the entire game, and all of this just for the end of the tutorial. The mech itself has tons of satisfying animations, as it uses its vacuum to suck up ink, transforms and flies into the air with its rocket boosters, and angrily slams the ink off the ground. I also love that the mech's attacks are telegraphed intuitively through different hand poses. The music is really the only thing holding this fight back from feeling intense and climactic, but that makes sense. It is just the tutorial boss after all, so this more muted remix of I Am Octavio is perfectly fitting, and the fact that it's timed to his intro cutscene just like in Splatoon 1 is a nice touch. Even the boss defeat cutscene feels higher produced than most, with the mech being launched into the sky by a fiery explosion and crashing back down into the roof of Alterna, transitioning seamlessly into the next story beat. It's really good stuff. Of course, it's intentionally not quite as grandiose as a final boss would be, and that does mean it doesn't quite reach the peaks of spectacle that some fights higher on the list have to offer. It's not really a knock against this boss, just the nature of its design, but that's why it's not getting a perfect score. And all things considered, I think this boss nails having a unique identity. Considering it's the third fight against the same character using the same kinds of basic attacks, it does a lot to stand on its own 2 feet through new gameplay elements and standout visuals. This isn't just Octobot 3, it's that fight against a mech in a sandstorm where you throw a fish into a vacuum cleaner. It's just a good encounter all around, with polished gameplay, solid character writing and animations, and unique mechanics that combine for a surprisingly memorable moment. A good job, Splatoon 3, you got this one right. Okay, we're a bit over halfway through the rankings. Hope you're still hanging on. It's at this point in the list that we reach, in my opinion, a turning point. It's where Splatoon's bosses go from good to great. And with that, I thought it would be a good idea to take a step back and look at the wider picture. We've talked a lot so far about the 3 categories I've outlined as most important, and while I do think these are helpful in providing my thoughts on a boss's strengths and weaknesses, it's about time I got into more detail about what even makes a boss fight good. From my highly qualified perspective as a guy on the internet with opinions, I believe a good boss fight in a real-time action game like Splatoon should do 2 things: manipulate player movement and reward strategic gameplay. If you don't do something to force the player to move, they're naturally going to find an optimal position and stand still, which in an action or platforming game obviously isn't very interesting. This is my issue with a lot of the bosses early on the list. Take Parallel Cannon for example. The enemies take so long to reach you that you barely have to move from one spot the whole fight. Alternatively, a boss might require a player to move in order to reach a weak point, but if it doesn't do anything to obstruct or add tension to that movement, it might end up feeling too simple. Octonozzle doesn't do anything to stop you from shooting at its suckers. Octomaw just kinda sits there while you break all its teeth. In a game with excellent boss fights, for example Hollow Knight Silksong, the battles are often described as a dance, where the boss plays their part and you play yours, jumping, dashing, bouncing off the enemy, and striking when you have an opportunity. Manipulating the player's movement through the choreography of a boss's attacks determines the flow of the battle. Another great example is Raven Beak from Metroid Dread. For one of his attacks, he creates a damaging energy field that covers the entire arena, leaving only a small gap of safety around himself. This encourages the player to run right up next to him, but his next attack will always be a melee slash, immediately forcing you to dodge. This kind of back and forth drives the flow of the fight, with the player always having to get up close or run away. Without the energy field, the player would never have a good reason to be in range of Ravenbeak's slashes, making the attack much less threatening or interesting. Without the slash, there wouldn't be anything to stop you from spamming missiles at close range. Together, they encourage a series of movements that take advantage of the entire arena. If the player does their part in learning a boss's patterns and how to respond to them, they should be able to avoid taking damage. But great boss fights don't stop there. Here's where the second point comes into effect: rewarding strategic gameplay. And now that the player has avoided an attack, what options do they have to deal damage back? In Silksong, there are tons of different tools and abilities you can acquire throughout the game, many of which serve as additional attacks. The most basic tool is the Straight Pin, which acts as a ranged projectile. With this, you don't just have to play your part, you can add your own moves to the dance. The boss's attacks, which first appeared only as obstacles, now present an opportunity. The flow of the battle has not been disrupted, but through strategic play, the player can now deal nearly twice as much damage in the same amount of time, greatly increasing the likelihood that they survive and win the fight. However, by taking these additional actions, the player also opens themselves up to being punished by the boss. It's a matter of risk and reward. Higher effort play that puts the player in more danger should be rewarded with greater progress through the fight if executed successfully. Obviously, Splatoon's boss fights aren't as challenging or fast-paced as those in Silksong, or even Metroid. But if you look closely, I think you'll find that a lot of the same principles are being applied. Pay special attention to the fights where gameplay is the main thing I'm praising, and I think you'll begin to see some patterns emerge. Of course, they don't all play exactly the same, that'd be boring. There's an infinite number of ways to achieve these two goals. Splatoon's best bosses showcase just a few of them. To demonstrate, let's return to the list, with the first boss I would consider to be in this upper tier. Yes, I know, that is quite the gap between the first Octo Samurai fight and the rematch, but the baller version really just is that bad. As stated earlier, this fight is a roller-on-roller duel to the death. I know some players weren't a fan of the Sheldon request system, where the game ignores your chosen hero weapon and forces its own selection upon you, but at least when it comes to Octo Canyon's bosses, I definitely think it was the right decision. Basing this fight around the hero roller makes for a neat dynamic, where the boss is essentially a tanky, super-powered version of the player, and it stops it from being way too easy. The battle begins on equal footing, with the two of you trading roller flicks. Unlike most of the fights we've covered, damage isn't only dealt when a weak point appears. You're free to wail away on the man himself, with the amount of ink on his body indicating how much damage he's accumulated. After some time, the samurai's weapon and unicycle combine into the octocycle, allowing him to charge forward and ink large portions of the arena. arena. Next, the samurai's roller powers up, introducing vertical strikes into its attack rotation. Additionally, he'll now sometimes unleash a spin attack, telegraphing it with a glint in his eye. The last phase sees the roller transform. It's now capable of a motorized slash, which sends forward high damage waves of ink across the whole arena. The samurai will also occasionally jump, dodging out of the way of the player's flicks and repositioning for its own attacks. Each phase ends once the samurai is splatted, which reveals the weak point of its weapon/spawn point. Pop the tentacle 3 times and the battle is won. So how do the principles I outlined before apply to this fight? First, manipulating player movement. The hero roller is most effective at short range, so the player will naturally try to get up close to the boss. Of course, the samurai's attacks are also close range, so the player is forced to strafe left and right as they approach. But you'll notice, all of the samurai's other attacks are about disrupting this strategy. Specifically, they are designed to create space between you and the boss. The octocycle obviously takes the samurai to the other side of the arena. The jump pulls the samurai out of harm's way. The spin attack forces you to back off or get your armor broken, and the motorized flicks keep you at bay, dealing damage from a distance. Rather than just letting the player run in and destroy the boss, the developers designed these attacks as a response to the most intuitive strategy. The samurai is playing his part in the dance. The only way for you to keep getting close to him is for him to keep running away. This gives the fight a loop, rather than it being a one-and-done interaction. But of course, bosses are ultimately designed for the player to win, especially in an easier game like Splatoon. So how does the samurai reward strategic gameplay? Well, if you pay attention, the samurai actually provides ample opportunities to take advantage of. After the octocycle charge, he stops to rest. After the spin attack, he pauses. A skilled player who understands their own role in the fight will already be chasing the boss down during these attacks, so that they can capitalize on these vulnerable moments as soon as possible. Unfortunately, I do think this is where the boss lacks a bit of tension. There isn't any additional risk here, since the samurai will just jump away or attack normally when coming out of his vulnerable animation. I think that's fair enough for the second boss in the game, but we will see better examples of this later on. Similarly, when it comes to adding your own moves to the dance, there aren't that many opportunities for extra player expression here. Splat bombs can paint under the samurai's feet, slightly slowing its movement, and players who have already unlocked curling bombs can use them to quickly navigate the arena, getting in more damage than would be possible otherwise. The difference is pretty minimal though. Obviously, this boss isn't at the top of the list, and that's because it isn't perfect. But what I'm trying to highlight here is the intentionality with which the boss is designed. Every attack and defensive option aids in overall flow. The player's job is more complex than simply shooting a weak point. You have to pay attention and make appropriate decisions based on what the boss is asking of you. Importantly, the pacing of the fight can be influenced by the player's level of knowledge and skill. In my opinion, that's what makes the bosses in this half of the list stand above. The spectacle should be easier to cover. The background is interesting. I guess it's supposed to look like a cage match, but the cage is made out of exhaust pipes. That's pretty cool. Wait, hold on, the sumo lines are here in the original fight too? Okay, the rematch is even worse then. Regardless, I do really like the Octo Samurai's design. He's a massive warrior Octarian, wielding a custom dynamo roller and riding a unicycle. It's a goofy look, but also just cool enough that you can kinda take it seriously, especially with his long, auriful ponytail. One detail I never actually noticed until making this video is that the handlebars of the octocycle look like the hilt of a katana, which is also kinda sick. The whole dynamic of this fight in universe is really interesting too. When you deal enough damage to end the phase, the samurai gets splatted, just like an inkling or octoling, with a soul seen flying out of him. And after destroying the tentacle, we actually see the samurai use his roller to respawn, reforming his body out of the weapon's ink. What exactly the samurai is, in terms of octoling versus severed tentacle Octarian, is not really clear, but there does actually seem to be a lot of effort here to explain how he can be splatted 3 times in a row. This is the kind of attention to detail I really appreciate. It also means that when we break the spawn point at the end, the samurai just dies for real, I guess. fun. These same elements, a unique visual design, in-universe lore, and the fight's gameplay all contribute to a solid identity. Most bosses force you to reveal a weak point or use defensive phases to protect themselves, but the samurai fights with honor, taking every hit himself. He doesn't ever speak, but he does feel more like a character than the other Octo bosses, if just from the fact that he's a humanoid. I mean, according to the art book, he's a big fan of Callie, so that does give him a relatable personality trait. There isn't a massive leap in quality between this boss and the previous, but as I said, this is the turning point. Octo Samurai, to me, is the lowest high-tier boss. While his attacks are not anything particularly novel, the fight creates that consistent flow I'm looking for, and the visuals reflect a level of care and attention that elevate the whole experience. Bringing us back to the Order sector, it's time for Marina, Agitando?
Agitando.
Well, everything else is Italian, so let's go with that one. Marina Agitando appears at the end of Side Order's tutorial, after the player has just been taught about color chips, portals, and the different types of gelatin enemies. So naturally, this fight serves as a test of the player's knowledge and skill. Marina stands in the center of the stage, trapped inside a pulsating machine within an impenetrable barrier. Surrounding her are 4 portals, a common mechanic throughout Side Order that spawns enemies, but can also be damaged and destroyed. And so the objective is clear. The player must destroy each of the portals while dodging the enemies they spawn, as well as attacks from Marina herself, which come in the form of massive ink blobs, as well as a buffed and reskinned version of the Super Chump Special. One way this fight excels in both gameplay and spectacle is that these attacks from Marina are actually timed to the music. Have a listen. Even though this doesn't affect the fight that much, it's a pretty fantastic bit of polish that deserves some recognition. Unlike Side Order's other bosses, your weapon for this fight is always the same, an enhanced version of the Splat Dualies, powered up by the chips you collect on the tutorial climb. Most notably, this gives you greater range and damage from a distance, along with poison ink for the enemies to take even more damage. Speaking of, it's worth going into some detail on the gelatins, since they're the main thing you're going to be interacting with during this battle. Marching Andantes are just standard mobs that get in your way, mostly acting as sponges to protect the portals. Springing Spiccatos are enemies that bounce around, making them a bit harder to shoot. If they get close enough, they'll attempt to hit you with a slam attack, effectively a mini splashdown, but realistically they probably won't get that far in this fight since the portal explosion takes them out instantly. Once defeated, they turn into springs, which can be used to bounce into the air and glide around with the Pearl Drone, but again, there's not much reason to do that during this boss. Whirling Accelerandos are top-like enemies that quickly spin along the floor and bounce off walls. Similar to the previous gelatin, they become a useful tool once defeated, a top that can be pushed into a portal for big damage, which thankfully is practical. Battering Lentos are the tanks. Strong, slow, lots of HP. These can be a real threat, but if you focus on the portals, you'll probably be okay. Gushing Triomphales also exist, but really aren't going to accomplish anything here. Altogether, that may sound like a lot of complexity, and technically it could be if you spent way too long on this encounter, but the gelatins spawn from the 4 portals, and every time a portal is destroyed, it creates a massive explosion of the player's ink. If you play this part of the fight competently, you can pretty much go from portal to portal and probably not have to interact much with the gelatins at all. After the portals are destroyed, the machine trapping Marina becomes vulnerable. She actually spawns more gelatins during this phase, and with no portal explosion to fall back on, you will have to deal with them manually, which serves as a nice way to up the difficulty. The machine has a good amount of HP, so you'll alternate between avoiding attacks, fighting gelatins, and dealing damage. But once you finish it off, that's it. There isn't a third phase to this fight at all, leaving it on a bit of an anticlimax in my opinion. This is just a tutorial boss, and it already has a fair amount of complexity, especially for a first-time player, so I think it's fair enough, but I wouldn't have complained if it had one last trick up its sleeve. Now, admittedly, in terms of the design principles I've just been talking about, this boss isn't the strongest. It does do a decent job manipulating your movement by luring you in close with the portals, then pushing you back with Gelatin's and Marina's attacks, and there are some opportunities for player expression and strategy with the Spiccato Springs, Accelerandos, and ink rails placed at the edges of the arena, giving you the height to glide over obstacles. It's not a bad fight at all, just one that ends a bit too quickly and lacks a little depth. But can I just say, this boss leaves an impression. Even as someone who was pretty much expecting a brainwashed Marina fight, the way the game just drops this thing in front of you is super jarring in a way that's actually really cool. If it wasn't clear already, this fight has some fantastic spectacle. Loading in on the spawn platform, you're filled with an immediate sense of dread. The ominous droning sound and the fact that we see what's happening before any of the characters acknowledge it, it's just surprisingly effective at being unnerving. Dropping into the arena, we get an intro cutscene. The strange organic machine towers above us, presenting its victim Marina not in a position of humiliation, but strength. 8 and Pearl attempt to make contact, reminding us that it's possible for the protags to emote "What happened with Neo 3, man?" And in response, Marina awakens. Her head jerks forward mechanically, her hands and fingers contorting unnaturally as the machine comes online, moving rapidly, expelling steam as cameras are angled toward the heroes. Cutting back to the two of them, sporting determined looks, 8 summons their weapon, the portals spawn, and the fight begins. I love how weird this is. Brainwashed Marina could have been really lame, to be honest, but the execution here is better than I even imagined. It's not like Callie, where it felt like a cop-out from telling a more compelling story. This scene actually benefits the narrative, especially with it happening at the beginning of the game. The boss also does a much better job of making it feel like we're actually fighting Marina, and not just the antagonist with an idol slapped on top. The arena's nice too, not anything crazy in terms of side order environments. It is just another big white room, but the memory cubes being transported in the background are all Marina specific, like the TV and Pearl's chair from Inkopolis News. I love the way the cables are draped above the machine, strung up by a catwalk with stage lights, and how the platform below is hooked up to even more. During the fight, Marina actually dances to the music, and oh my god, I didn't even talk about the song yet. Unconscious, a track that's apparently so hard to spell NOA had to patch the jukebox, nice going guys, is my favorite song in side order. It's the perfect way to score the battle, featuring vocals from Marina, but more stilted and dispassionate than usual, like she's being forced to sing the words. Then suddenly in the chorus, she starts belting, like a cry for help, trying to break free from the song itself. It doesn't quite sound like she's in pain, but again, it's unnerving, while also kind of being a banger. Plus, the ending cutscene. Marina falls from the machine, 8 makes some effort to catch her, she regains her senses, and order awakens. Some other stuff happens too, but at that point we aren't really talking about the boss anymore. Again, it's just really nice for the protagonist to actually be a part of the cutscene and not an awkward bystander. 8 may not have dialogue, but you can at least kind of glean that they actually care about what's going on. It's something. I'll take something over nothing. For sure, this fight is carried by spectacle, but what about identity? Unfortunately, Marina does only have 2 unique attacks, blobs of ink and a modified PvP special. Most of the fight is spent basically playing a standard side order portal floor with a bit of extra danger. Not only that, but as we'll soon discuss, Marina turns out to effectively be a tutorial for the DLC's final boss, a more advanced version of this same battle. But in no other fight do we save one of the best Splatoon characters from a mind-controlling machine. Well, okay, unless you count Callie, but you know what I mean. The story scenario and fantastic presentation make this a standout moment, definitely one to remember. If anything, narratively, I find this more interesting than the final boss, so I still think it deserves a high score, even if the gameplay falls short of iconic. Gameplay-wise, Marina does everything she needs to do. Challenge the player while still easing them into side orders mechanics, and prepare them for a fight in the future. Encourage them to take advantage of the DLC's unique tools and movement options. Offer them some opportunities for skilled or expressive play. It doesn't push any idea that far, but it isn't trying to. It is trying to make a boss that looks fantastic, with music that complements it perfectly. It is trying to set up the story of the campaign with a great introduction of its 2 most important characters. And that's where it truly succeeds. Just making it into the top 10, it's the big bad boss of floor 30, the Magistrate of Order, Overlorder. This shouldn't come as a surprise. I just said that Side Order's final boss is an evolution of Marina's fight. And now it's time to go over what sets it apart. Well, not much at first. Overlorder, who I'm just gonna call Order for short, guy has 3 names, might as well use them, protects itself with a barrier, as 2 portals appear on either side. The portals spawn some gelatins as usual, and taking them out breaks the barrier. Exposed, Order will use these same attacks as Marina, the big super chumps and ink blobs. Though, to be honest, I always just pop my special once Order becomes vulnerable, which usually shreds through this phase pretty much instantly. Might as well point out right now that, of course, this is the end boss of a roguelite, meaning you can come into this fight with literally any possible combination of main weapon, sub, special, marina hacks, and color chips, including abilities for the Pearl Drone. More so than even the other bosses in Side Order, a lot of your experience with this fight will depend on the choices you make during a run. I cannot account for every possible build in the entire game, but I will do my best to give a general overview of how the fight typically plays out in my experience. Also, the arena looks different in post-game. Sorry if it's jarring to constantly switch between dark and light, but as far as I'm aware, Order's first 3 phases are identical on any run, so it shouldn't be an issue. Moving on, Phase 2 gives us 3 portals, and finally something different from Marina. The portals can now move, something that never happens in the standard stages. This one change genuinely makes the fight a lot tougher, because the portals recover health over time. If you don't deal enough damage when you have the chance, a portal can get away, spawning gelatins in its wake to slow you down as it regenerates. Thankfully, the player is given tools to deal with this. The portals slow down when moving across your ink, as well as taking damage, which can be increased with the poison damage and hindrance damage chips. This will also reset the timer on their healing, so it's a good idea to have a solid amount of control, at least around the portal's base, before you start shooting at it. Like Marina, after the barrier is down, Order can spit out some extra gelatins, even with no portals, so you'll always have to be looking out, though once again, it's typically pretty easy to shred its HP before that becomes too much of a problem. In Phase 3, there are 4 portals to take out, and Order starts putting them in more inconvenient spots, including the back corner of the map where you probably haven't put down any ink. Thankfully, like Marina, there are some rails placed around in case you need to make a quick getaway. In addition to the Super Chump and Ink Blobs, which are still timed to the music by the way, it'll also start throwing out some new attacks, and they're pretty scary. One is a triple Stingray Beam, thankfully without the Splatoon 2 shockwave, but it's still able to cut through walls and chase you down. Next is a barrage of reskinned Reef Sliders, which, like the multiplayer version, send out trails to telegraph their movement. These can easily end your run right then and there, because one will come out and break your armor, and then another will come to finish the job. Once you learn the fight, the solution to both of these is basically just keep moving. Rotating around the center of the arena will keep you safe from most of the danger, since Order has to physically turn to aim the stingrays, and the Reef Sliders always travel the same distance. But they definitely can still catch you off guard and disrupt your attempts to shoot down portals. My favorite new attack is this one, where Order submerges its arms into the ink, a red indicator appears, and then 4 massive tentacles rise from the floor, sending you flying into the air if you're close enough. These tentacles instantly break your armor upon contact, so you'll want to glide out of the way and land safely. This is the only boss attack truly designed around the drone glide, and while it's not very punishing to get hit by the initial launch, it's pretty scary to get thrown 50 feet into the air. It's like riding a roller coaster, you know, the fun kind of disorienting. However, if you avoid the initial launch, this attack can feel a little jank. The solution is still just to get out of the way, but it definitely feels like you should be able to slip between the individual tentacles. As far as I can tell though, it's just a giant hitbox of death you have to avoid entirely. Not a problem once you know what to do, but considering dying in this fight could set you back anywhere from 25 to 40 minutes, depending on how good you are at Side Order, it feels especially important for the telegraphing to be clear, and this isn't. Once the barrier is broken again, the final hit isn't nearly as free as the past 2. I'm not sure of the exact HP values, but you'll almost definitely want a special to do most of the heavy lifting here. Finish it off and Phase 3 is complete. One last thing. According to Inkopedia, the fight against Overlorder is somewhat affected by which floors you clear, in that different types of gelatins will spawn. It doesn't elaborate any further or provide a citation, and personally, I have no idea how this works. I've definitely seen every type of basic gelatin in this arena after having fought the boss dozens of times, but I could not tell you which floors result in which enemies. I figured I should mention that this is a feature, but from my own perspective, it is extremely unnoteworthy. While Marina served as the DLC's tutorial, this is the final exam. In part, a test of the skills you have honed over the course of several runs, and in part a big damage sponge onto which you may unload all your hard-earned firepower. This boss is very solid. It's got some of the same issues as Marina, which I'll get to in a bit, but as a standalone experience, it's challenging, there are lots of variables and decisions to make, mechanics and game knowledge to take advantage of, and a good flow, with the fight taking you from portal to portal around the arena, or spinning in wide circles to avoid threatening attacks. Importantly, it is, in my opinion, very replayable, which is good considering it's a mandatory part of every successful run. There isn't a ton of fully original content in this battle, but what's there is mostly well designed and a fun way to cap off every climb of the spire. Now, I have some issues with the narrative. I made an hour-long video on this game's story, and the section on this scene was mostly criticism. But if you asked me, in a vacuum, do the visuals and music support the gameplay and enhance the experience of this boss fight? My answer would be absolutely. To start with, the arena looks great. I especially love these pulsating tentacles, the things we say as Splatoon fans sometimes, and the massive screens showing nothing but static. I wish the off-the-hook stage wasn't just there from the get-go. It kind of spoils what's about to happen, but I guess it would also be weird for it to appear out of nowhere, so I get it. A small thing I appreciate about Side Order is that each fight features some unique ambiance before you enter the arena proper. Here, it's just a simple repeating synth note, providing some tension as you ride the cage forward. The writing in this intro scene is quite good, with Order reaffirming its view of control as a way to mitigate fear. The music actually builds from that ambient track at the start, reprising the melody from Order's original appearance as it gives its speech. Marina directly opposes this view, clearly demonstrating her development since Splatoon 2. As an entity born from the fear that Marina has now overcome, Order cannot comprehend this change. It begins to panic, glitching and shaking before leaping into the air, crashing back down, and assuming its powered-up form. I love that Marina and the others actually get to be a part of this scene. For 8 and Pearl, their inclusion is minimal, but again, it's something. They aren't just standing there in an idle pose while the story happens around them. Then the fight begins. Harkening back to the DLC's main theme, the track New World Order opens with a haunting music box melody underscored by a rising and falling synth. 13 seconds in, the synths take over, leaving us with a dark, foreboding score that matches Order's appearance perfectly. Side Order's soundtrack stands out a lot from most Splatoon music, and that can especially be heard here. Rather than developing the motif from Order Appears, this track mostly focuses on a powerful, driving rhythm. The melodic content that does exist is very repetitive, mostly serving to raise the tension higher and higher until the song loops back to the music box, giving us a moment to breathe while still feeling ominous. I think this makes a lot of sense for the story and this fight. Order wants to repress emotion, crush our will under the weight of the collective. It refuses to change, and so the soundtrack does not evolve its theme, but enforces it. Overall, I definitely prefer the more melodic themes of the other final bosses, but I really respect what they were doing with this track, and I love how distinct it sounds from the rest of the series. With that said, honestly, I don't love Overlorder's design. It's not bad. I really like the glowing core in the center surrounded by all of the plastic glow-in-the-dark gelatin parts. In general, the idea of Order being the ultimate gelatin is pretty cool, with a translucent gelatinous body and visible bones. Are they bones? Octopuses aren't supposed to have those. I don't know. But I guess that after fighting so many weird and creative creatures over the course of Splatoon's history, Order just being a giant octopus with glowing red eyes feels a little obvious. I at least wish it could have been some kind of fish or shark like the other gelatins. I'm a much bigger fan of its glitchy cloud form, and kinda wish we got to fight that one instead. By the way, I lied. Again, the first time you fight Order, it actually has a special 4th phase. I'm talking about it in the spectacle section because it's pretty much a playable cutscene. Order tries to grayscale the entire world. For some reason it doesn't work, and we play a rhythm game to wake back up. I've stated my issues with this scene before. I do think it's unfortunate that it kinda totally undermines grayscaling as an actual threat if we can just power of friendship our way out of it, but I admit, going through this sequence the first time was pretty cool. Everyone wakes back up, Oct and Marina start DJing it out, Pearl aura farms a bit, and we regain control. I do think this scene is a bit drawn out without much narrative substance, but it only happens the first time and it isn't that bad, so whatever. As for the gameplay, all of the chips get removed from your palette, leaving you with the base version of whatever weapon you chose. More portals appear around the arena, each containing every chip of a certain type. One at a time, each portal powers you up, resulting in the ultimate Splatoon power trip where you get to tear through enemies with maxed out stats. It's obviously not mechanically deep or challenging, but that's not the point. It's just a fun reward for making it to the end of the game, and it is very satisfying for what it's worth. During this sequence, we hear the song Spectrum Obligado, transitioning into Ebb and Flow Out of Order. Unlike New World Order, it's not doing anything new or exciting. I don't really like that it ends up just being another remix of Ebb and Flow, since the payoff for that song made more sense in Splatoon 2, where we already got it in Fly Octo Fly. I get that it's effectively the theme of Off the Hook, but so is Color Pulse, which was teased earlier in the DLC with the tutorial Stage Clear jingle. This made me think we were going to get a final boss version of that song, so when it turned out to be Ebb and Flow 3, I was a bit let down. The song works fine in context, but outside of the game, there's effectively a 1.5 minute intro, followed by almost 2 more minutes of build-up before it finally feels like it's going anywhere. This is timed well with how the events play out in the game, with there being a cutscene, 8 regaining all the color chips, then blasting Order away at the climax, but as a piece of music, it's just not that interesting. The Side Order main theme doesn't even appear in the melody until the last minute and a half. Before that, it's basically just Ebb and Flow. For this to be the culmination of that music box theme from the first trailer was definitely disappointing. Also, I can't get it out of my head that it sounds like a 2012 YouTube gaming intro. And we're not done yet. Man, there's a lot to say about this boss. Upon defeating Overlorder, it's turned into Smollusk, a tiny octopus larvae that talks like a stupid baby. I actually think this is a much more fun and unique design, though any feeling of Order being something to fear and respect is immediately gone. Smollusk is effectively the stand-in final boss for subsequent runs. It turns into the Overlorder when approached, which is a little strange to be honest, but I get it. This is a good enough reason to justify continued climbs up the spire, even if I definitely think there's missed story potential here. This isn't really the video for that though, go check out the Side Order essay if you care. And yes, the post-game fights have a different song. This guy is greedy. From now on, the track that plays is Short Order, an upbeat, pop-sounding tune sung by Pearl and Marina. It's definitely jarring going from New World Order to this, but in practice I actually think it works. You eventually hit a stride with Side Order where you have enough permanent upgrades and experience and you're just kinda chilling, finishing up the rest of the palettes. In that context, this song is fitting. You aren't at the end of a climactic story, it's just another day on the job for Aiden Smollusk. I like it. Sadly, this does mean the attacks synced up to the BPM of New World Order are no longer synced to the music, which is a shame, but ultimately a small price to pay. It's hard to summarize all of that into a single number. I certainly have mixed feelings about the specific execution of some elements, and it's not my favorite spectacle by far, but I do think between its 3 decent visual designs, average to great music, rhythm section, and transforming arena, there's enough polish in the presentation to justify a perfect score. Finally, we get to Identity, where I also have a lot to talk about. Overlorder is a rare case where I would actually argue Identity is its biggest flaw. The presentation makes it memorable. The character interactions, the cutscenes, the rhythm moment, these things definitely leave an impact. But for a final boss, I guess I was hoping for a little more. I can't help but feel that, like many aspects of Side Order, this fight was held back by the need to fit into a roguelite structure. The need to allow the player to tackle the boss with any combination of weapon, sub, special, special and buffs, the need to make it simple and intuitive as to not catch players off guard at the end of a long run. Because Overlorder had to be fought in so many ways, its mechanics couldn't be specific to the strengths of any weapon. It couldn't be too surprising or gimmicky, because then dying to it would feel unfair. What I'm trying to say is, Overlorder feels too safe. It's a much better, more challenging, and more fun final boss than Octobot 2, but it still left me feeling disappointed. The boss is replayable, but I'm not sure how much of that can actually be attributed to the boss itself. Like with Marina, most of the time you're fighting Order, you aren't really fighting Order, you're just playing a portal floor and shooting gelatins. Overall, I think the fight reaches some impressive highs, but the moment-to-moment gameplay just isn't that different from most of the game. The way I see it, the role of a boss is to shake up and evolve the core gameplay, and I honestly don't think Overlorder does that enough. Story-wise, Order is arguably the worst execution of a final boss. I think there's a lot of interesting lore behind its origin and motivations if you dig deep enough, and trust me, I tried, but let's be real, 90% of Order's dialogue is just generic AI jargon with no real substance. Its visual design is relatively basic, its transformation into Smollusk is kinda whatever. It just doesn't leave me with any kind of emotional fulfillment the way Splatoon's other final bosses do. And so, here it lies. Top 10 is nothing to be ashamed of, and I'm glad Splatoon's most recent game managed to end on a note as high as this. I don't think Overlorder will go down as one of the community's favorites, but it is probably one that we've collectively fought the most. It's a good enough ending to every run of Side Order, and that may sound like an insult, but I can't imagine it's easy to make a boss that stays fun for this long, or that can be fought in this many ways. Order's versatility is both a blessing and a curse, limiting its ability to surprise and stand out, but also technically allowing for the most player choice of any Splatoon boss. I don't expect the roguelite structure to return, and personally I don't want it to, but all things considered, Overlorder got the job done, and looked pretty good while doing it. Closing out the Deep Sea Metro's Octoboss entourage, it's the Octo Shower Supreme, featuring some very legible white-on-white text. Ow, my eyes. Again, we have a kind of awkward placement where I have to explain what the original boss is and why I think this version is worse. Octo Shower, fundamentally, is a really great fight. You want to know the biggest reason why? Look at that arena. There's stuff. There are things to do. The terrain is varied. There are gimmicks, for crying out loud. So many bosses in Splatoon have practically the exact same arena. Big, flat circle. It's boring, it's overdone. Please give me some platforms in my platformer. Thanks, Nintendo. These 5 structures placed around the map would immediately make this boss stand out regardless of what its attacks even were. Just hopping around this place is fun, with lots of cover, dash tracks to get up quickly, and the best part is, an actual reason to use it all. The boss itself is a flying machine carried by a few octocopters. In the original fight, your method of attack is the Hero Charger, while in the remixed version, you have a full-on infinite inkjet at your disposal. As a reminder, the inkjet is a jetpack that allows you to hover in the air, boost midair for what is effectively a double jump, and shoot slow but strong projectiles. The single-player version of the special was given a significant speed boost to its movement, and it's worth remembering that you can still enter squid form while it's in use. There's actually a bit of an invisible inkjet tutorial at the start. Rather than hopping into the arena via launch pad, you have to glide down with the jetpack, but there's just enough distance that an air boost is required to make it, effectively teaching the player that they can do that in case they didn't already know. Once the fight begins, your goal is to shoot the little guys down, causing the boss to plummet to the floor, exposing its tentacle. But the shower doesn't dare fly close to the ground. You have to climb up the 5 towers, generally whichever one the boss is hovering around, to reach the enemies in the first place. Already, this fight incorporates more platforming than nearly every previous boss combined. I mean, a lot of it is just climbing walls, or in this case, boosting over platforms with the inkjet, but that's already an extra layer of interaction that most fights simply don't require. I know I'm putting a lot of emphasis on this, but platforming to reach a boss is just fun. It absorbs all of the benefits from Splatoon's existing platforming design to add that extra bit of tension and player expression into every moment of the fight. If you ask me, this is something every Splatoon boss should be doing. Alright though, let's get to the attacks. Similar to how the samurai fight was a close-ranged clash, the shower focuses on ranged projectiles and sniper-adjacent moves, including what is basically just its own charger. The octocopters themselves are powered up, shooting some rapid-fire shots right out of the gate, while the shower throws out a couple octorpedoes, an attack taken from Splatoon 1 Octavio. Phase 2 ups the number of octocopters from 3 to 4, and adds some new moves into the mix, starting with this hand-crank splatling attack, which actually is much scarier in this version, since the Inkjet's airspeed, while buffed, isn't quite fast enough to outrun the barrage. And next comes the Octo Shower's Shower, which, as previously mentioned, is quite similar to the Octobot 2 attack, except a lot better. The wind-up is actually way faster than the version used in the final boss, and the shower tilts a bit from side to side while charging, meaning it paints more of a wavy trail than just a straight line. This effectively makes the danger zone of the attack a bit wider, forcing you to make a decision and dodge quickly. Crucially, this attack is actually the boss's best defensive option. And not only does it allow it to fly to the other end of the arena, but because aggressive players will be climbing the towers in order to shoot the boss down, like with the Octo Samurai, the shower charge acts as a response to that strategy. The boss hovers by a tower to lure you close, gives you an opportunity to shoot a few copters down, then pulls out the shower, forcing you to abandon ship. Once again, this creates a consistent gameplay flow. Climb tower, shoot enemies, dodge shower, repeat. This fight keeps you moving, constantly, and it feels great. Hitting the copters actually takes a decent amount of skill, and you know the shower will always come out eventually, so there's a palpable tension as you try to get as many shots in as you can before the shower effectively resets you back to neutral like a Guilty Gear wall break. The fight never feels too repetitive either, since the torpedoes and splatling give you other threats to deal with between each cycle. Finally, we get to phase 3, where the shower is picked back up by 4 speedy octocopters, the kind that can dodge back and forth in the air. Along with all of its existing moves, the boss now pulls out a Stingray, which, just like the multiplayer version, can cut through walls and damage you over time. The Shower Supreme uses the buffed version too, which grows a shockwave after a couple of seconds, effectively doubling its hitbox. This is the move I don't really like. Once again, the Inkjet's airspeed isn't fast enough to outrun this attack, meaning your best bet is actually to enter swim form, where you can move back and forth in your ink to avoid the laser. On paper, this is really cool. The fight making use of the Inkjet's ability to do this seems like a great call, and a logical evolution for the third phase. And yeah, it's not terrible. Under the right circumstances, it can actually feel really cool to dodge. But you aren't always going to be under the right circumstances. Sometimes the Stingray will come out when you're trying to climb a wall and you just kind of have to tank some of the damage. Sometimes the floor won't be inked well enough, and you can't just paint it with your inkjet because then you'll be inside a laser. There is a specific method you can use where you paint a path with the inkjet's exhaust, then dive down and swim back and forth. And this works. Dare I say, it's even pretty cool. But it doesn't remove the fact that other times the Stingray will catch you off guard and there's not much you can do. It's an issue of inconsistency. Sometimes you'll get your armor broken by the Stingray, then old Shower Supreme whips out the hand crank again and it's like, okay, guess I'll die. Because swimming in your ink is normally how you heal quickly, this fight can leave you in a vulnerable state for much longer than usual, since it's almost always optimal to stay in the air, leading to some deaths that can feel a little cheap. The devs definitely knew this too, just look at Cuttlefish and Marina backseating like their lives depend on it. It's not that much of a problem, it's just the main flaw this boss has, so I wanted to make it clear. And beyond the Stingray, this is a really solid fight that is less fun than the original in my opinion, but not because of any glaring flaw. The visuals are pretty great. It takes a lot from the first iteration, as always, but with some cool twists. The background effectively takes the original Octo Canyon assets and corrupts them, turning the clean water and clear pipes into an ecological disaster. I really love the lighting and the sense of depth in this environment. It's definitely on the higher end of arena designs. The battlefield is tiled like a bathroom floor, eloquently fitting into the theme, and the boss, of course, is both a shower cap, a shower head, and a drain all in one, while also looking like an Octarian UFO. It's actually quite a clever design, and while Supreme is only a recolor, it still looks great. They even made an evil sanitized version of Quackers, the shower's rubber duck and romantic interest. I did not make that up, by the way, that is real lore. Generally speaking, Octo Shower Supreme does a great job of standing apart. It is a rematch and does use all the same attacks as the OG, so it's not a perfect score, but the Inkjet genuinely changes the way you approach this boss. Reaching the copter octocopters is easier, but dodging is harder. You can shoot faster, but you recover damage more slowly. A different weapon and a different set of movement tools means a different set of skills are at play, and the strengths and weaknesses of the player and the boss are shifted around. Not to mention, fighting a UFO with your own flying jetpack is its own kind of sensation on a more superficial level. And so, I dub Supreme almost perfect in all three categories. It benefits a great amount from the foundation set by the original fight, but with a different enough feel and presentation to allow it to stand well enough on its own. With that summary, I bet you'll never guess what boss is up next. Okay, this is the last time we have basically the same boss back to back, I promise. The original Octo Shower is everything I just described, but better. The octocopters don't have their rapid fire, instead acting like the normal enemy, but beyond that, same attacks. We go from 3 copters to 4 speedy copters. It introduces the hand crank splatling, shower attack, and stingray. All the stuff we just covered. So what puts this version above? Well, the arena is identical. 5 towers used to reach the boss. But rather than flying around in an inkjet, you have to fight the original shower on foot with the hero charger. Movement in the Supreme fight is fun. There's an inherent joy in flying around with a jetpack. But ironically, I think it makes the rematch a lot easier. The smaller towers can be climbed simply by flying over them, and for the taller ones, the inkjet puts you at the perfect height to swim right into a dash track. This is good design, but I personally prefer the challenge that comes with having to navigate the arena on my own. This version feels a lot more tense and scrappy. Since climbing towers takes more time and effort, you really have to scramble your way up before the shower decides to fly away. Once you get there, you also have to charge each of your shots, making the combat more interactive as you weave side to side and hide behind cover to dodge octocopter shots. It really feels like you're taking full advantage of the terrain, unlike the inkjet fight where the cover was largely useless. This also encourages you to be smarter about your play, taking advantage of more advanced techniques like storing your charge, using a dash track to fly up, and taking the boss by surprise. Dodging the shower charge attack is also way more fun in this fight. Same as before, the boss uses this to get you off a tower, and without the inkjet, that requires you to pay more attention, keeping the ground inked for a squid jump. I have like a core memory of playing Octo Canyon for the first time and dodging off the central tower at the last second, right as the shower passed by. It wasn't anything complex or impressive on my part, but it was a unique interaction that felt super cool to pull off. I really wish more bosses incorporated verticality to allow for this type of interplay. It's just a fun sensation. And yeah, despite being less complex, I do prefer this version of the stingray attack. Not only is it more intuitive and possible to dodge, it also lacks the shockwave from the multiplayer version, which is probably for the best. The hitbox just doesn't need to be that big. As mentioned earlier, this version of the arena features clear water, as opposed to the polluted Octo expansion setting. Again, this is a really fantastic background. I love the massive fan overhead, the colors used, and the water droplet effect on the screen. While we never learn anything about this specific setting, it feels like it could really be a part of the Octarian world, in a way most of the other Octobosses don't. Identity is a similar case to the other two categories. It's strong for all of the reasons previously mentioned and more, since the different options at your disposal make it a more interesting and interactive encounter. The theming is on point, and the focus on platforming stands out against most other fights. I really like the Octo Shower. I don't know if it's a weird opinion to place it this high, but I've always had it as one of my favorites. There really aren't any serious flaws I can think of. It's mostly the exceptional success of bosses up ahead that leave the shower down here at number 8. Mr. Grizz, we meet again. If you've been around my channel for any amount of time, you probably know that I don't really like this guy. That is, I have a multitude of issues with the execution of his character in Splatoon 3's story. But in a vacuum, is this a bad boss fight? Well, no, it's actually really good. If you thought Octo Shower had a unique arena, take a look at this. The fight begins aboard the Spirit Lifter, a rocket that has just been launched into space. The player has to navigate this giant cylinder covered in enemies, platforms, and obstacles in order to approach the boss in the first place. Starting at the base of the rocket, we're introduced to golden eggs and fuzzy ooze. Well, I say introduced. This has been a mechanic throughout the entire game, used to bar the player from progressing through Alterna until they've completed enough levels. But this is the first time fuzzy ooze has appeared in a boss fight, and one of the only times it appears in a proper mission. So the game eases you into it, with just 2 golden eggs to collect and 1 fuzzball to destroy. Mr. Grizz isn't just waiting around though. From a distance, he sends out occasional ink strikes, as well as Octorpedoes that home in on the player. Guess Octavio put those things on clearance. And next, there are some Octotroopers to fight and 3 more eggs to collect. Once you close the gap, Grizz attacks with claw slashes that send forward waves of ink, as well as a slam that damages and launches the player backwards. Your goal is to weave through these attacks and deal enough damage to a weak point on Grizz's chest so that it becomes vulnerable to Small Fry. Using Small Fry on the exposed fuzzball deals a hit and ends the phase. So far so good, but here is where my first issue comes in: the pacing. After each hit, the gameplay is interrupted by cutscenes where Grizz makes a business pun, slowly transforms into liquid, the camera just sorta lingers for a bit, pans further down the rocket, Grizz slowly rises out of the ink, stares into the camera, and screams. I think this is fair enough after the first hit for the sake of communicating the structure of the fight, but it could have been sped up a little bit, and the second one feels pretty unnecessary. It's literally the exact same animation both times. It's not a big deal, and you can skip these on replays, but I do find them a bit annoying. Regardless, Phase 2 develops the fight quite a bit. Not only do we have shielded enemies and more platforms to climb, but Grizz will start to rotate the rocket. This forces the player to continuously ink and swim against the rotation in order to not fall off into the void of space. This is a really clever and unique bit of platforming, and you do actually have to be pretty quick to survive. After a full rotation, you can collect any eggs you missed and move on. I like that the enemies and eggs start appearing further down the curve of the rocket, making them a bit riskier to reach. The combat is also evolved, with some octocopters thrown into the mix. Avoid more Grizz attacks, shoot the weak point, and Phase 2 is complete, after the aforementioned cutscene. Phase 3 begins with one of the tightest jumps in the game to grab an egg, while Grizz continues to launch projectiles your way. Tougher enemies appear, like these Twinticle Octotroopers, and there are way more clumps of fuzzy ooze, which, in case you forgot, are an instant kill upon contact. There's another rotation cycle, adding a layer of stress onto these interactions, and making it genuinely tough to avoid some of the ooze, asking you to make quick decisions and ink the right path. The last segment of the rocket is coated in ooze, giving you only a small bit of space to take out some Twinticles and collect the last eggs. Here, Grizz throws out a last-minute killer whale scream, forcing you to dodge to the side while it fires. I like this dynamic of dealing some damage, backing off to avoid an attack, then running back in. Weaving through the claw swipes is an especially cool feeling, and I'm glad the weak point has enough HP to actually make this a challenge. Chomp down on the final fuzzball, and the good part of the fight is over. After watching a 3-minute cutscene, which I will get to later, we enter the final phase, and unlike Splatoon 2 and Side Order, this is not a playable cutscene. The player is tasked with piloting the Octobot King, hey, it's that boss from earlier, and using its ink vac to suck the fuzzballs off of Grizz's body. Anyone ever notice these games are weird? This involves using gyro aim and holding down the trigger until enemies spawn in, forcing you to pop out of the cockpit and kill them before continuing the suckage. In theory, this is a cool dynamic. It's similar to the one I just described, where you alternate between attacking and dodging. Taking damage from enemies automatically knocks you out of the ship, so you do actually have to engage with the combat here. You can't just ignore it. The flying sections are even evolved, with floating bombs you have to avoid, armor pickups in case you don't, and huge fry making things more difficult. The bombs begin to move, making flight even trickier, and tougher enemies spawn in, like Octo Stamps, including the new kind that make shockwaves, Octo Hoppers, Speedy Twinticles, Octo Bombers, Speedy Copters, and one last Speedy Shielded Twinticle for good measure. After popping 4 fuzzballs, Octavio readies the cannon, and with the press of the trigger, you fire one last blast into Grizz's hairy chest to finally finish the job. Also, this whole thing is on a timer, so if you don't manage to kill Grizz before time is up, you get a bad ending and have to start the phase from the beginning. That sounds pretty cool, right? A unique mechanic, lots of enemy variety, and a massive set piece to close out the game. Well, yeah, but there are some problems. First, controlling the Octobot King is weird. Movement mostly feels fine, but for some reason the ship slows down substantially while the vacuum is active, and since there's a prompt on screen telling you to hold down ZR, I've seen some players get confused here and press it before they've moved into position, wasting a ton of time. It's not a massive issue, but I do think this could have been communicated more clearly. Continuing this trend of confusion, the game refers to the bombs as fake fuzzballs, and the dialogue box warning you about them appears as they spawn. It's easy to assume that you might need to suck up these fuzzballs just like the others, but touching them with the vacuum actually damages you. I honestly feel like just calling them bombs would have solved this issue. I mean, they even look like burst bombs for multiplayer. Though dodging the bombs just doesn't feel great in general. The game is generous with armor pickups, so you probably won't die to them, but the speed at which the Octobot moves compared to the bombs just makes these sequences feel sluggish and awkward. And not to mention, once again, the pacing. It's not so bad in this phase, and I do get that the game clearly wants to give you a good look at the spectacle, but having a timed challenge where the player has to spend a total of 40 seconds waiting around not only makes it less fun, but kind of cheapens the challenge, since you know a chunk of that timer can never be optimized. And speaking of the spectacle, Huge Fry only serves to make this fight occasionally more annoying. Sometimes it will ram into Grizz, knocking the fuzzball out of the way, and like, it only wastes a few seconds of your time, but I don't really get why this happens at all. He's supposed to be on our side, why is he even doing that? Mechanically speaking, the first part of the fight is great. Some of Grizz's attacks are things we've seen before, but the unique terrain helps to make them stand out. Others are totally new, and complement the structure of the fight well. The platforming is completely unique, and the additional task of collecting golden eggs is a good way to control the pacing of the fight while still being satisfying for skilled players. Phase 2 is the most okay thing ever. The best parts are easily the fights with enemies on this tiny arena, but you have to slog through 4 boring flight sections to get to them. On paper, the visuals do add a lot to the experience, but gameplay-wise, I think this is a pretty weak way for the game to go out. Whew. Alright, here it is. The spectacle for the Mr. Grizz fight. It's not getting a perfect score. Really? I mean, this is a 2-phase space battle with dynamic music, massive set pieces, and multiple full-blown cutscenes. How could it do any better than this? Well, the first reason, as you might know, is a personal one. I don't really like this spectacle. As I've stated in other videos, I don't think the heights of absurdity this scene manages to reach are particularly fitting for the world of Splatoon, let alone the story of Mr. Grizz and the Alternans. It's difficult for me to enjoy these cutscenes when the characters involved are poorly written and when the set pieces are absent of any context. I don't like Mr. Grizz's visual design. I think it clashes tonally with his dialogue and the tragedy of his character. And if that's supposed to be the joke, I don't find it funny. If that's not enough for you though, I do think there are some fairly objective issues with the presentation here. For one, and I know this is gonna sound dumb, but why is the gravity like this? The rocket is pointing directly away from the Earth, but you fall off the side. This wouldn't bother me that much if not for the fact that later in the fight, the rocket does a 180-degree turn back toward the Earth off screen. They could have just placed the rocket parallel to the planet, and it would look like it was in orbit, which it should be if the plan was to crash the rocket back down. A nitpick maybe, but come on, man. The worst offender though, by far, is what happens after the third hit. I'm not the kind of person who likes to skip cutscenes. I want to care about what's happening in the story. I want to see characters have their moment to shine at the end of the game. But if a cutscene is boring and feels like it's in place of me getting to do something interesting in the video game, it can get annoying. If you're going to pause the action in the middle of the most mechanically interesting part of the entire game, I would hope there's a good reason for it. And in the 3-minute runtime of this cutscene, I would not say there is. The first 40 seconds are fine. Grizz blasts Neo 3 off the rocket, and DJ Octavio swoops in to save them. How Octavio found out who Mr. Grizz is, or that we were fighting him in space, is never explained, but in terms of communicating plot information to the player, this is fine. The next 40 seconds literally just consist of everyone aura farming for no reason. If I did a CinemaSin style breakdown of everything that bothers me here, that bell would not stop ringing. In the other games, there being a musical performance at least made a little bit of sense. Splatoon 1 and 2's fights are supposed to be concerts, and in Octo Expansion, Pearl and Marina played music while actively doing something to help save the world. Here, Deep Cut and the Squid Sisters are standing underground where no one can see them, staring at the ceiling as if they can see into space, and doing their entire podcast routine for no one. The next 50 seconds are dedicated to Small Fry's transformation into Huge Fry. This is at least something notable story-wise, even if it makes no sense, is never explained, and is effectively pointless in moving the plot forward. We then spend 20 seconds explaining what Grizz is even trying to do, we hang on this shot of the Earth for 12 seconds, and the remaining 20 are spent providing the tutorial for the Octobot King. Here's the thing. If this story was good, if these characters mattered to what was happening, this wouldn't be a problem. It's not meant to be deep storytelling, it's just meant to be fun, I know that. But it isn't earned. It's disruptive to the part of the story that's actually interesting, and it pulls control away from the player for way too long without justifying its stay. For that reason, I don't think the boss deserves full points in this category. The focus on spectacle actively detracts from the gameplay, and honestly, the storytelling. This isn't story. It's fan service of characters I haven't been given much of a reason to care about. Simply put, this cutscene drags on, and it kills my enjoyment of this fight on a replay of Splatoon 3. You can skip it when replaying the fight on a completed save, but again, I don't want to skip the cutscenes. Removing the scene doesn't replace it with a better one, it just leaves the finale feeling even emptier. Of course, with all of that said, the fight doesn't look bad. Speaking objectively, few bosses in the series feature this level of gravitas. The Spirit Lifter rocket looks great, blending gameplay and aesthetics perfectly. There are lots of great details, like the view of the planet, the space junk and asteroids floating around, and the use of golden eggs, taking an element of Mr. Grizz's backstory and working it into the gameplay. The bombs in the final phase have little bear ears on them, and as much as I do not like the fact that Huge Fry exists, his smackdown with Grizz is pretty entertaining to watch at times. The music is deserving of praise as well, especially the track Bear With Me. I know some people aren't a fan of the way it starts, going from the dramatic cutscene of Mr. Grizz to this dinky little melody, but I actually think it works. To me, it sounds like Neo 3 getting their bearings in outer space before focusing in on the task at hand. In fact, the song starting with this minimal instrumentation ends up emphasizing the chaos of the later phases, where it builds up into a cacophony of electric drums, horns, vocals, and bells. Adding to the track's climactic feel is the fact that this melody is derived from Happy Little Workers, the theme of Grizzco Industries, perfectly fitting for a battle against the bear himself. The last phase plays the Calamari Incantation 3 mix, which personally is my least favorite version of the song. It's not bad by any means, and the incorporation of Shiver, Fry, and Big Man's signature musical styles, in addition to the Squid Sisters' vocals, is impressive. However, the most iconic part of the original song was its catchy driving melody. This particular melody is also an important part of the game's lore and in-universe culture. In 3 Mix, the melody is obviously there, but it gets kind of lost in the chaos. Maybe that was the point? It is neat to hear Deep Cut take it in their own direction, and the high notes from Shiver in the second verse sound great. I also like the breakdown section 3.5 minutes in, probably because this is where the melody is the most exposed. Overall, I'm just not as big a fan of it as the past 2 versions, but it's still very good. When you actually get to play it, this fight looks and sounds fantastic. I have my issues with it, and I acknowledge that a lot of people will disagree with my assessment. But this is my list, and I'm not going to pretend that these flaws don't worsen the experience of the fight from my own perspective. One thing I can never take away from Mr. Grizz is a unique identity. The gameplay alone would carry this category. Why more bosses in this platforming game series are not designed as platforming gauntlets is beyond me, because it works so well every time they do it. The cylindrical arena and the fuzzy ooze mechanics lead to a fight unlike any other, and the second phase, while not always fun, is an entirely new style of gameplay. Everything about this boss is designed around Grizz's character and story. From the rocket, crucial to his plan, serving as the arena, his immense size and strength enabling a distinct dynamic with satisfying attacks to dodge, and his unwavering persistence, throwing the fight into a second phase where it takes the cooperation of every character in the story, including a previous antagonist, to finally put an end to his assault on planet Earth. The fight is iconic, whether I like it or not. There are many things I would change about the execution of this finale, but today we're talking boss fights, and I honestly have more good things to say than bad, or at least that's the way the scores worked out. Strongly held story opinions aside, I don't think Mr. Grizz was ever getting higher than this due to the Octobot King jank and simply how many good fights I could place above it, but I hope if you love this boss, you'll agree that number 7 is a reasonable placement. There's a lot it gets right, but for me it falls short of the peak. So long, Space Bear, and good work. And here we are. The climactic finale of Splatoon's best story, the battle against Commander Tartar to stop the Nil statue from destroying the world. This is an extremely unique fight. Rather than dodging attacks and looking for openings, the Nil statue is effectively a target shooting mission where the goal is to detonate every hyper bomb in order to coat the statue in ink. The hyper bombs are effectively reskinned balloonfish, meaning they only need to be hit by a single shot in order to explode. The main challenge is in navigating around the arena and reaching every hyper bomb within the allotted time. You have 3 minutes to paint the whole statue, with the bombs appearing in waves one after another. The first wave is fairly simple. 5 bombs appear on the statue's chest, requiring you to shoot down at them from above. Wave 2 places another 5 around the neck, which leads to more interesting navigation as you climb up and around. Wave 3 launches bombs at the statue's back, and here's where the difficulty goes up a notch. You're asked to take a ride rail, shooting bombs as you pass by. Missing a bomb isn't that detrimental, but it will cause you to waste some time backtracking later, and that can add up quickly. If you do clear it all in one go, you'll be dropped off on another rail circling the statue's arm, which is exactly where Wave 4's bombs are headed. This is a trickier version of the last wave, where you have to ride a curved rail and alternate looking up and down to hit each target, and don't forget about the bomb on top of the arm. Last is Wave 5, featuring 10 bombs placed all around the statue's head. You'll have to jump onto a series of spiraling ride rails, taking you higher and higher. Switching rails is made easier with the addition of grapplinks to pull you right into place, and once you're high up, you can rain down fire from above. The timer will always run until it hits 0, so if you missed any bomb up to this point, you're able to go back and clean up. If you're still missing a bomb when time's up, you fail and get a bad ending cutscene. If every bomb is popped, you win. This is a completely different kind of challenge compared to anything we've talked about so far. Of course, there are normal single-player levels that do feature comparable gameplay, but none with this kind of unique terrain to navigate or spectacular presentation. As a gameplay challenge, I think it's great. Difficult target shooting missions were already some of my favorites in Octo Expansion, and I think this works well as a final test of the player's skill to conclude the game. However, it isn't perfect. For one, I do think it can be a bit overwhelming. I'm at a point now where I pretty much just have all the bomb locations memorized, but on a first playthrough, it is a lot to take in. The game does do its best to set you up for success. Before the fight begins, Marina gives a quick rundown on where each waves of bombs will spawn, and you can see holograms placed around the statue displaying their locations. Each wave is also color-coded, corresponding with the holograms and the icons on the map showing you where each wave starts. Oh yeah, the map. There's a fully unique 3D map of the statue in the corner of the screen that rotates as you move around, so you have a lot of tools to work with. All the same, Marina's explanation can feel a bit like information overload, and I don't blame people for feeling confused or disoriented their first time playing. Similar to Mr. Grizz, some of the dialogue might add to this confusion. I've seen a lot of people get lost on Wave 3 specifically, where the characters start yelling at you to get to the back. This is a little counterintuitive since the best place to start Wave 3 is actually right where you began the fight. Most players will have just finished looping around the statue's neck, so they'll pretty much be there already. But regardless of your position, everyone keeps telling you to move. I think it might have been helpful to either use one of the big flashing arrows like the early levels of Octo Valley and Canyon, or even place a waypoint on the 3D map of where you should be headed between waves. At the very least, there could be a check of your position so that Cuttlefish isn't telling you to move when you're literally in the right place. As always, on replays this isn't an issue, but a lack of clarity doesn't stop being a problem just because you can figure it out eventually. It's not a huge issue. I'm glad there is some challenge to the navigation, and there is a lot of information to accommodate the player. I just think it could have been polished a little bit further. Speaking of replays though, here we run into another problem. The problem of waiting. Marina launches the hyper bombs at set intervals, regardless of how good or bad you're doing. This means if you finish a wave optimally and move into position, you're left waiting for the next set to appear. This isn't as egregious as the Mr. Grizz Octobot waiting, since you do have to platform to the next area and could make mistakes, but the first couple of waves are simple enough that, yeah, you're gonna be waiting. The mechanical execution of popping the bombs is difficult and satisfying enough that I don't mind this too much, but at the end of the day, I will always prefer the pacing of a boss to be in the hands of a skilled player, rather than filled with arbitrary empty space. Arbitrary isn't entirely fair. It probably would be worse if you could blast all the bombs instantly and then just have to wait an extra minute and a half for the timer to run out, and the story is set up in a way that the final bomb is kinda supposed to be shot at the last minute, so I understand why this is the case, but it does make the fight less fun for me. There is some consolation. If you're really quick, you get some extra dialogue at the end that only appears if all the bombs have been destroyed. It's pretty much just Pearl and Marina goofing around, but it is a cute detail. Overall, how do I feel about the mechanics of this fight? They're definitely good, but in terms of what I'm personally looking for in a boss fight, it doesn't completely deliver. Maybe this is me being arbitrary, but this just doesn't feel like much of a fight. We are performing a series of gameplay tasks in order to stop an antagonist, but there's nothing like the tension of avoiding an attack or the satisfaction of landing a powerful blow. I'm not even saying that this fight should have been designed differently. It's a great send-off to the game, but if we're purely talking about gameplay, I don't think this is the best Splatoon boss. Combined with the aforementioned clarity and pacing issues, I'm led to give the Nil statue a middling score in this category. But it's this far in the video for a reason. Everything that isn't the gameplay is absolute perfection. It starts with the intro cutscene, and yes, this is a long story moment where control is taken away from the player. But first of all, this immediately follows a different boss fight. Some first-time players might think this is the end of the game. It's not interrupting the gameplay right at the climax. This is the rising action. And does that action rise? First, we have the scene of 8 reaching the surface. I wouldn't really consider this a part of the Nil statue fight, but it's absolutely an important piece of context that powers the emotions we feel during the boss. Then Off the Hook arrives, picking up 8, Cuttlefish, and Agent 3. We get some cute banter between the characters, and then a sound. 8 looks back down at the water, I love this little double take they do, and the Nil statue begins to rise from the sea. What haven't I said about this moment? There is no better way they could have revealed Tartar's connection to the humans and the professor. I made an entire video essay talking about how this cutscene permanently altered my brain chemistry, and that video became the foundation of my YouTube channel going forward. If you're watching this far into one of my videos right now, you probably understand on some level just how important this scene is to me. And still, to this day, it blows me away. The way the statue's design ties perfectly into the vaporwave aesthetic and Splatoon's existing post-apocalyptic lore. The commitment to making it realistically proportioned and not some lame cartoon version. Just the confidence and sincerity with which all of this is presented. It's just so cool. Commander Tartar itself is a great character design. It used the guise of an old-fashioned telephone, which conveniently looks like the face of an Octarian, to lure and kill thousands of victims in its misguided plan to carry on the wish of the professor. Driven to its limit by loneliness and anger, it transforms into an amorphous mass of sanitized ink, at last unleashing the rage it has felt for millennia upon the world. And yet, Tartar makes this confrontation personal. It doesn't even care about Cuttlefish, Agent 3, or Off the Hook. All it wanted was 8's DNA, and having been denied its prize, it now seeks to annihilate their paradise. There are no unnecessary jokes to undercut the tension, no hanging too long on shots with no substance. Even the tutorial is great. Marina whips out her laptop and makes a bunch of doodles in Clip Studio Paint. This was not necessary, but it's so much more charming and creative than just explaining what to do. The character animation is also surprisingly strong here. It doesn't feel like the characters are putting on a performance, they're just being themselves. I love 8's silent nod, the little smile Marina gives to Pearl before explaining her role in the plan, Pearl's body language in response, and we can't forget about 8 cringing at Cuttlefish. From the insane reveal of the Nils statue in Commander Tartar, to the intensity of its methods, to the intimate and expressive character moments, this is easily my favorite Splatoon cutscene, and the perfect way to set up the final challenge. And during the fight, it looks just as good. The Angopolis skyline can be seen in the distance, across the ocean, shimmering orange in the sunrise. When you are left waiting for the next wave of bombs, at least the view is fantastic. Not to mention the detail of this mission being called Turf War with the multiplayer graphics and everything. Scoring this finale is Fly Octo Fly, another iconic banger that incorporates motifs from Test Past and Got That Thang, making it feel like a celebration of 8's efforts thus far. This doesn't just feel like the theme of the game or the flagship idols. This is the theme of 8, of the player. You made it to the surface, you've earned this moment, and you will not let it be taken away from you, right? But then, as the timer approaches the final minute, the song transitions into a dramatic rendition of Ebb and Flow. This keeps up the tension, but the vocals and instrumentation add a layer of emotion that was previously absent. It's getting down to the wire, there isn't much time left. For me, this song is the end of Splatoon 2. We've come full circle. Inklings, Octolings, humans. Everything that Splatoon has been about up to this moment is in full view. We say farewell to this game and these stories with the song of the people who began the journey with us. You can hear some uncertainty in the long note Marina holds as the clock hits 0, unsure if the plan was successful, if the world was truly saved. The screen fades to white, and it's over. Needless to say, I adore this ending. The presentation of this fight, these characters, this music, it's genuinely perfect. Gameplay aside, this is my favorite sequence in any video game. I can only hope that another game will come along that touches me in the way Octo Expansion did. Trying to put a score on Commander Tartar's unique identity is laughable. 100% doesn't feel like enough. This boss practically redefined my perspective on media. Even if it didn't affect you quite as strongly, it's not a hot take to say that this is the greatest set piece the series has ever seen. And even if we're talking about the gameplay, it stands out. No other campaign uses a timed platforming challenge as its final boss, making this sequence wholly original. I could go on and on about just how unique this encounter is, but I have already done that in another video, and I think you get the point. One thing I would like to point out is how the Nils statue has lived on, appearing in Splatoon 2's Final Fest and now left to rot under Hammerhead Bridge in Splatoon 3. It's so cool to me that this is just a part of the game's world now, as a remnant of humanity and our own previous adventures. Commander Tartar and the Nils statue have become an irremovable piece of Splatoon history. It's an excellent finale to what is still considered by many to be the best Splatoon campaign and story, and it stands apart from every other other final boss, even in its mechanics. The gameplay isn't perfect, and in my opinion, isn't as fun as many other bosses on this list. I do believe the fight is carried by its spectacle and story significance. But holy shit is it carried! This fight takes direct advantage of one of the most fascinating elements of Splatoon's lore, the death of humankind, evolving our understanding of this setting with incredibly compelling dialogue and imagery. The fight has arguably the best presentation of any in Splatoon, with great character animations, beautiful scenery, fantastic music, and endlessly entertaining cutscenes. Experiencing this fight is a joy. It's challenging, testing skills the player has built while still feeling fresh and surprising. It was, and still is, the peak of Splatoon's visual storytelling, with gameplay that complements and accentuates the tension the cutscenes build, and it ends with a satisfying defeat of the series' best antagonist. It may be a surprise to see me put the fight this low. Again, I wouldn't argue that anything about it should change. Sometimes there are just better ways to end a game than a perfect boss fight. But on this list, right here is where it belongs. More than any other, this next boss benefits from the context surrounding it. So allow me to set the stage. Just off the heels of the telephone's turn against Cuttlefish N8 and a badass reveal of Agent 3 comes the incredible Deep Sea Metro escape sequence. Level after level, the tension rises and the stakes escalate. After the bombastic score of the first 6 phases, the spinal phase begins in eerie silence. 8 slowly rides a rail to the center of the room, where a massive elevator stands, ready to finally bring them to the promised land. But halfway up, the elevator suddenly halts. Confused, 8 searches for the source of the malfunction. Looking up, they see If this list was based purely on hype moments and aura, sanitized Agent 3 would be number 1 from their intro cutscene alone. Knowing when to let loose with fan service and when to show restraint can be a difficult thing, especially when your series is only 3 years old. But this fight checks nearly all of the right boxes for me. Before I get ahead of myself though, let's talk mechanics. Obviously, Agent 3 is fundamentally a CPU player. They can shoot, jump, swim, throw bombs, and use specials. But unlike the parallel canon Inklings, who get shredded in a matter of frames, Agent 3 actually has HP, and attempts to avoid your fire in a number of ways. Like usual, the fight develops across multiple phases, with Agent 3's hero armor breaking after taking enough damage, causing them to retreat and recover, which is itself a nice touch. The fight begins with 3 splashdowning into the arena and dodge rolling to avoid your attacks, immediately solving the sitting duck problem of parallel canon. They'll also throw out some curling bombs to claim a bit of the arena in their color ink. Phase 2 sees 3 immediately popping a baller, once again shielding their landing. Here, the AI unfortunately isn't great at attacking with the special, being pretty easy to knock back and getting entirely confused if you ever climb a wall. This reduces the baller to little more than a damage sponge and leaves the phase feeling pretty underwhelming. But then, Phase 3 throws in a unique twist. Rather than jumping back in, Agent 3 stays on board their UFO and pulls out a Stingray. As any Splatoon 2 veteran will tell you, this is a genuine threat, especially if you don't immediately figure out how to counter it. You can dodge by swimming perpendicular to the laser, but you'll take damage as long as you're making contact. To clear the phase, you need to throw 2 splat bombs in quick succession onto the UFO. Finally, in the last phase, they let loose, not only landing in a super jump splashdown, but following up with 2 more. You have plenty of time to evade these attacks, and a generous window to shoot Agent 3 between each jump, but it's still a fun, flashy, exciting way to end the duel. Of course, what this boss is really remembered for, I would say, is its spectacle and identity. The visuals for the escape sequence are some of the best Splatoon has ever seen. The spinal phase is an imposing, portal-esque chamber at the peak of the comic Demo Cove facility, and the arena, rather than being a floating platform, actually fits perfectly into this environment. I love that the elevator stops just before we reach the surface, showing that Tartar is still the one in control, and adding some genuine stakes to the outcome of the battle. 8's perseverance and Tartar's desperation are on full display here, backed by one of the coolest musical compositions in the franchise. When Agent 3 first appears in Octo Expansion, we hear the iconic intro to Splatak, the theme of Splatoon 1. This establishes the song as a kind of leitmotif for Agent 3, with them representing the legacy of the first game. And when we battle them, we hear Splatak Octo, a distorted, glitchy remix of the theme. This is hardly the first game to do something like this. Hell, Splatoon 2 already did it with Cali, but combined with everything else, it's the perfect cherry on top that solidifies this as one of the defining moments of the series. The Splatoon fans are still frequently drawing fan art of sanitized characters nearly 8 years after this fight, and I don't think that would be the case if Nintendo hadn't executed the presentation of this boss so well. Agent 3 isn't just another rival Octoling, they're the player character of the previous game. It's hard not to be invested in a boss's design when you're the one who made it. I think it's clear that the story elements and visuals give this fight a strong identity, but what about the gameplay? Early on in this video, I criticized an over-reliance on multiplayer mechanics in single-player boss fights, as I believe they can make a fight feel more cheaply made and less distinct from existing Splatoon gameplay. So you might be wondering how a fight entirely based around PvP specials managed to get this high. And well, I do think the boss could have scored better in mechanics if it had fully unique attacks. But overall, I'm not as bothered by the use of multiplayer weapons in this fight. The specials Agent 3 uses are ones that are mostly fun to interact with in a single-player setting, and a lot of 3's attributes, like HP and movement, are greatly enhanced compared to typical CPUs. The specials also aren't just thrown out and that's the entire attack. They either serve as tools to help 3 hunt you down, barriers to prevent you from damaging them, or distractions that have to be dealt with while 3 is actively shooting at you. The Stingray and Triple Splashdown also basically feel like new attacks, with both requiring some form of unique counterplay afforded by the arena and Agent 3's unique movement. Not to mention, aesthetically, it just makes sense for 3 to use subs and specials from PvP. They're an Inkling who battled in Inkopolis. It doesn't feel as much like copy and paste here, partly because it works in-universe, and partly because the fight actually makes significant changes to the mechanics. If anything, the use of multiplayer weapons in this battle strengthens the identity of the fight. The player is effectively fighting a past version of themselves, so it tracks that they would have similar means of fighting back. There are things I would change about this boss, but it gets so much right, especially in terms of plot and presentation, that it's difficult to find fault in it. Sanitized Agent 3 is the definition of iconic. In this category, I can't give them anything less than a perfect score. I will always love Octo Expansion for being the follow-up to Splatoon 1's story that Octo Canyon largely failed to be, and there's no greater example than playing as the previous enemy fighting the previous protagonist. This fight is just awesome on both an in-universe lore and meta level, and I don't think we'll ever get something quite like it again. With that said, it's not in the top spot. Why? Well, as much as I love the presentation, the mechanics do leave a bit to be desired. The fight is unfortunately pretty easy, especially on replays. The first 2 phases are fairly underwhelming in terms of Agent 3's attacks, and the last 2 are well designed, but they're over pretty quickly. And there's a good reason why. A reason that, as I'm sure you're aware, marks another entry on this list. An entry that solves all of these issues. As much as I want to put Agent 3 even higher, mechanics matter to a boss fight. The gameplay contributes as much, if not more, to the overall feeling of a boss than its visuals and music. And the truth is, I think the next 4 bosses have stronger gameplay. But don't worry, 3 fans, this isn't the last we'll see of this agent. I'm not sure if this is what you would call a sleeper pick, I frankly haven't seen much discussion of Side Order's bosses in comparison to the other campaigns, but I knew the second I played this boss for the first time that it belonged in my personal top 5. Continuing Side Order's trend of ditching traditional phases, Asynchronous Rondo presents a fight where the player simply has to deal damage to its 9 layers until there are none left. The layers are stacked from smallest to largest, allowing for an organic difficulty curve as the fight goes on, since the boss will physically cover more and more of the arena. Getting into the attacks, this is a Splatoon boss that actually incorporates the ability to hide in ink. I know stealth is not really what the single players have ever been going for, but it's kinda crazy to me that this core gameplay element that is crucial in PvP has barely seen use in the campaigns. Rondo is meant to look like a watchtower, and so it has a rotating spotlight that searches for the player, triggering attacks if it catches you, including toxic mist, torpedoes, and splat bombs. These are meant to slow you down, making it harder to deal with the gelatins spawning from the center of the map. You can hide from the light by moving slowly in swim form, or by hiding behind cover at the edges of the arena. Of course, you can't just hide forever. You attack by shooting directly at the boss, dealing much more damage if you target a layer's gelatin face. After a layer has been destroyed, the ones above it will shift down into the empty space. After a certain amount of time, Rondo's faces will retract, making them invincible, and the whole machine will start spinning rapidly. Here it will either spawn a swarm of homing arpeggios, a barrage of splat bombs, or a stingray assault, where it fires several beams from a rotating layer. Often you'll need to dodge these attacks while simultaneously dealing with typical gelatins. After the attack ends, you're given a good opportunity to counterattack while the boss cools down. In theory, the safest place to stand would be directly under the boss, since none of these moves will reach you there. However, Rondo accounts for this, sending out damaging shockwaves to repel you. These increase in frequency the longer you stay close to the central pillar, making it difficult to deal damage and stay alive from this position. Difficult, but not impossible. That's a solid lineup of attacks, but on their own they aren't that extraordinary. What makes this boss so fun, in my opinion, is the ways in which you take it down. The obvious strategy with most weapons is to shoot each layer from the bottom to top, finding the weak point and firing away. However, as the layers increase in size, so too will the range of the shockwaves and spotlight. So a good idea for shorter ranged weapons is to leave the bottom layer intact. The actual win condition for the boss is just to destroy the 3 layers with lights on them, so you can clear the fight without ever touching the bottom ring. And naturally, that means long-ranged options are going to want to go straight for those glowing layers. You'll still have to look out for the searchlight, gelatins, and 3 spinning attacks, but you can now take out the layers in the opposite order. Once the 3 key layers are destroyed, the rest of the boss will self-destruct and victory is yours. This leads to a boss that feels really different depending on your choice of weapon. Some will spend the fight jumping over shockwaves and targeting weak points from underneath, while others will hang back at the edge of the arena, using bounce pads and ink rails to reach up high. You can intentionally leave lower layers alive, or blast through multiple at a time with specials like Ink Strike and Booyah Bomb. It's worth noting that some of these strategies are very effective. A strong charger build can melt through this boss, but it's not mindless. Rondo will always have at least one invincible cycle where you're forced to dodge attacks and enemies. It takes decent mechanical skill and some game knowledge to get through the fight quickly. And in terms of 100%ing the game, you will eventually have to face Rondo with the weapons that aren't as strong against it, in which case you can adapt in real time and use a different strategy, or build around those weaknesses, increasing your range with color chips and selecting effective specials from vending machines. In both cases, I would say Rondo is succeeding as a side order boss. It encourages players to make decisions, either in preparation for the fight or in real time, depending on their preferred playstyle and their current build. It's easily the boss that's most affected by your loadout, which in my opinion makes it more fun and replayable, and it's the reason this is my favorite boss in the DLC. Likewise, the visuals are on point. Rondo is styled after a panopticon, a prison structure where a central watchtower can observe every cell at once. This fits perfectly into the theme of order, while also blending the design of the boss into its environment. The outer edges of the arena look like prison cells, and there are even parts that light up in response to the boss taking damage. When it comes to sound design, well, There's something both cute and disturbing about this weird singing, made even more interesting by the fact that these sounds are actually 52 randomized clips that, when played in the correct order, reveal the song to be Ebb and Flow. This is such a strange detail, seemingly playing into the idea that the Memverse is made from the memories of Marina and other Octarians, but corrupted, and in some instances destroyed by Order. And this is something you hear, if only for a moment, every time you face off against the boss. Another weird sound detail is the heartbeat that you can hear under Rondo when it's sending out its shockwaves. These noises aren't the main thing you're going to be paying attention to during the fight, but they are very unique and certainly add some character to the fight. In terms of sounds you are definitely going to hear, how about that soundtrack? Opticon is one of my favorite boss themes in Splatoon. It's similar to Side Order's other boss tracks in that it is a fast-paced electronic beat overlaid with powerful synths, but this one goes the extra mile in my opinion. 40 seconds in, we get a classic use of the Onward motif, but it builds even further from there. I don't quite have the music theory knowledge to break this part down in detail, but especially on the second and third loop, it just goes crazy. This boss is a treat to look at, with a stunning arena, wonderfully weird sound design, and some marvelous music. It doesn't quite have the gravitas of a final boss encounter, but for a mid-game fight, it does just about everything right. How about Identity? Asynchronous Rondo is certainly a unique fight. Its layer mechanic allows for a variety of strategies, its attacks are varied, and, as I just stated, there is a lot of work put in to give it a distinct level of character. But the moment-to-moment gameplay does feature some similarities to fights we've seen. Circling around an arena, shooting gelatins, dodging bombs, some basic attacks like multiplayer sub-weapons, and the Stingray, which is shared with a number of fights. Even these things aren't bad, they're well integrated into the boss's design and gameplay. It's just not the most unique fight in the world, and so it's held a tiny bit back. Rondo is great. It's fun, it's weird, and it can genuinely feel different from run to run. The attacks are synergistic, the music is frenetic, and the pacing is almost entirely up to the skill of the player, while still allowing the boss to deliver a challenge every time. With all of Octo Canyon and Side Order now behind us, we enter the top 3. First up on the podium is perhaps another surprising pick. Shiver, the Cold-Blooded Bandit. While not the flashiest fight in the campaign, I personally think it's the one with the best gameplay and most replayability. Not to say it isn't at all flashy, Shiver begins by jumping aboard her tamed shark, Master Mega, who swims in circles around the arena. Mega will attack by flinging waves of ink with his tail, which are pretty threatening as they one-shot your armor. Eventually, Mega will swim under the arena, rising up from below in an attempt to swallow you, very similar to Maz from Salmon Run. And just like Maz, you can throw a sub-weapon into Mega's mouth in order to deal damage. This stuns the shark, leaving him vulnerable as he attempts to flop back into the ink. Mega can actually use another attack here, where he'll charge across the surface of the arena using his boosters. This one comes out fast, and honestly still catches me off guard sometimes with its wide hitbox. However, it turns out this is another bomb opportunity. Throwing one will cause Mega to skid to a halt and get stunned like before. Oh yeah, I should probably mention that just like the Octo Samurai, you actually deal damage to Master Mega himself, until his entire body is covered in ink. Once this happens, he will buck Shiver off, causing her to land in the center of the arena. Splatting Shiver ends the phase. Another noteworthy part of this fight is that rather than using a big flat circle arena like so many bosses prior, this boss takes place on a small circle, with like a bit of a dome shape to it. It sounds like I'm joking, but this makes a world of difference. Too many bosses allow you to run a mile away from where the action is taking place. For early bosses, I get it, but by late game, this genuinely feels like too much wiggle room. In Splatoon 3's case, it's kinda weird because they seem to have it figured out by Octobot legs, but Fry and Big Man still ended up defaulting to the old design. Shiver's arena not only starts out small, forcing you to engage with the boss's attacks at close range, but it actually gets smaller after each phase, limiting your space to evade even further. Phase 2 begins the same as before, until Master Mega suddenly summons a cyclone of ink to swim on top of. He'll jump between these cyclones in an attempt to evade the player's fire, once again in a similar manner to Octo Samurai. After a few jumps, he'll fire out an ink laser. Not quite a stingray, but a unique attack that deals big damage and inks the floor. Afterwards, Mega will appear exhausted, with his mouth gaping open, serving as a third opportunity for a bomb, leading to another stun. Deal enough damage to send Shiver flying, and the final phase begins. Shrinking the arena one last time, Mega begins attacking with the same methods. He flicks with his tail, summons the cyclones, jumps between them even more quickly than before, then fires out 3 lasers in a row. This is a really fun attack to avoid, requiring you to paint over the trails he leaves and weave between the beams. Throwing a bomb at the end and getting to deal a ton of damage serves as a great reward, and it might actually take a few cycles to finish him off here, especially if your hero shot isn't upgraded. Deal the final blow to Mega, splat Shiver, and that's that. In short, this fight is fantastic. Every phase involves attacks that require attentiveness and quick movement in order to successfully evade or counter. The player is constantly being pulled in different directions, either dodging or chasing down Master Mega. And importantly, this fight is all about rewarding strategic gameplay. You can go through the fight doing nothing but shooting with your hero shot, but it will take much longer, forcing you to survive multiple cycles of tough attacks. However, if you're observant, you'll take advantage of openings to put the boss in a weakened state. 3 different attacks are designed to be countered with sub-weapons. Importantly, in all 3 cases, countering doesn't nullify the attack. You either have to react quickly or survive the attack in its entirety, then throw the bomb after. Skilled players will save their high damage special weapon for the vulnerable phase that follows, allowing them to accelerate the pacing even further. Alternatively, the splashdown can also be used during the cyclone attack, allowing players to finish off the boss if it's low on HP. This is what places Shiver so high. Rather than scripting a sequence of events that will inevitably end with the boss becoming vulnerable, progress through this fight is determined by the damage dealt to Master Mega. This keeps the difficulty of the boss intact while still allowing skilled players to get through the fight faster by taking advantage of openings and managing a resource for the right moment. Shiver is a fight that makes genuinely good use out of your main, sub, and special weapon, which is sadly a rare occurrence, but I'm glad we at least got to see it here. The fight takes place in a setting that, once again, doesn't have much context in the story, but it definitely fits better into Alterna than Fry and Big Man's arenas, appearing to be some kind of massive Alternan bank. I'm a little thrown off by the massive scale of the drawers. Splatoon has a history of giant objects hanging around in the background, but since most of Alterna is scaled realistically, it kinda stands out. Still though, it's a cool backdrop, and it aligns with Shiver's characterization as the greediest of the bandits. I especially like the detail of this iron cage dropping down on top of you as you step foot in the arena. If you die and respawn, you even get to super jump through the bars. This is also the only time the giant vault containing the treasure doesn't feel out of place. Shiver herself sports a pretty great design. I especially love her animations at the start of the battle, not to mention the fact that she rides a rocket-powered shark. Shiver's character is basically girl failure who tries really hard to act cool, and her animations before and after a phase put that dynamic on clear display. Her fumbling the dramatic exit is the cherry on top. In the end, it's not the most beautiful fight in the world, but it does what it sets out to do. It's really just the background that I find a little strange, and also, who put all this blue ink here? Did Shiver do that? Is she okay? Identity-wise, well, it's surprising that it took this long to fight a shark enemy in a series with sea creature theming, but it really lives up to the mantle. Fry's fight, maybe outside of the swarm attack, never felt particularly inspired by anything to do with eels, and Big Man's shapes on the floor also could have been anything. Here, it feels like you're fighting a shark, in the sense that it keeps trying to eat you, you have to quickly swim out of its way, and you fight back Jaws style by exploding it from the inside. It's also kind of funny that Small Fry counts as a viable sub-weapon. I guess he's just violently bouncing around in Mega's stomach. These attacks stand out quite a bit, but I actually think part of what makes Shiver a successful boss is the lessons it learns from previous games. You can definitely see the DNA of past bosses shining through. The damage system and dodge move are taken straight out of Octo Samurai, and the bomb attacks are pretty much a microcosm of Octoma. However, that doesn't detract from what the fight is, because Shiver evolves those concepts into something entirely new, or at least executes on them in a more interesting way. The fact that it borrows so much only makes it even more impressive when you consider how unique the end result is. Even if there are some mechanical similarities, nothing else feels like fighting Shiver, and aesthetically, it absolutely nails it. In my opinion, Shiver stands leagues above the other Alterna bosses. I definitely think she should have been the one to close out Deep Cut's triple act, but as things are, this fight serves as an extremely memorable halfway mark for the campaign, where I personally think the game's bosses peak. I have always enjoyed this fight, though admittedly, even I didn't think it would end up in my top 3. But if you know anything about me, these last 2 bosses are probably ones you saw coming. Your memories of that day have returned. Inner Agent 3, by nature of being a Splatoon super boss, was always destined to place high on this list. A remixed version of the original fight with everything turned up to 11. The boss is accessed by clearing all 80 tests around the Deep Sea Metro and completing the escape sequence at the end of Octo Expansion. With those requirements in mind, the developers decided they didn't need to hold back. This is, without question, the most difficult fight in the series. To defeat Inner Agent 3, you must deal enough damage to break their armor like before. Unlike before, they now have more health, move faster, shoot more accurately and aggressively, and have 5 phases, in which they use different specials than the original encounter, notably ones that the AI is much better at killing you with. Agent 3 moves and shoots closer to a real online player than we've ever seen in a Splatoon bot. They break your armor much faster than you break theirs, forcing you to play safe, but not too safe, since they heal any damage taken over time. It begins with 3 using a splashdown to enter the arena. From here, they'll begin shooting to cover turf and damage the player, using dodge rolls to avoid your fire. Agent 3 actually has to charge their special by inking the floor, which means it is possible to knock them down before a special comes out, but they often will manage to get it in time, leading to the first special of the fight, Inkjet. Like in multiplayer, Inkjet is both a threat and an opportunity. 3 is fairly vulnerable while suspended in the air, and you can break their armor to end the special early. However, their aim is pretty good, and if you fail, you're very likely to die. One direct shot will break your armor, and since the splash damage is enough to finish you off, hiding behind cover won't do you any good. 3 also, infamously, has access to auto bombs from the start of the fight. Broken armor and auto bombs, as we'll soon find out, are a recipe for a swift death. The slower but safer strat is to wait out the Inkjet and target 3's landing. They can roll out of it with their dodge, but they won't shoot right away, so you can still use this as a chance to end the phase. In all 5 phases, the name of the game is Ink Control. This arena is small, and it doesn't take long to get covered in enemy ink. You need to take every opportunity you have to take control back, which in turn makes managing your ink more of a concern, since there's no real downtime, even between phases. If you aren't shooting, you're losing space, and Agent 3 is gaining it. 3 splashdowns back in, and we begin phase 2. After some standard shooting, 3 will whip out a bubble blower, making 3 bubbles at a time. They'll then attempt to shoot at them, potentially dealing massive damage and inking turf with the explosions. You can counter this not only by shooting at the bubbles, which shrinks them back down, but also by shooting at 3 while they're occupied with the bubble blower. Though you have to be careful, because 3 will actually sometimes throw an auto bomb here, which not only explodes upon contact with a bubble, but can also instantly pop the bubble. Bubble Insta-Pop was considered an overpowered strategy in competitive multiplayer, so it's kinda nuts that they casually gave a boss the ability to do this. Regardless, rushing them down while the special is active is normally the best way to go, since they won't have access to their hero shot. Phase 3 starts with a 3rd splashdown, and this one is especially dangerous since there will probably be some leftover bubbles from Phase 2, effectively widening the radius of the explosion. Once again, taking back control and shrinking the bubbles between phases is your best bet. Then begins the most dangerous part of the fight. Auto bomb spam. Yep, the third special is an auto bomb launcher, allowing 3 to throw out tons of potentially life-ending homing robots. Of course, dealing with the bombs on their own is nothing crazy. They attempt to walk towards the player, then explode once they're within range. Swimming close, then backing away, or just moving past them quickly will bait out the explosion and you'll take no damage. The issue with auto bombs is what happens when your armor gets broken. The movement penalty applied to you the second your armor breaks makes you just slow enough that you cannot outrun the bombs. The second they start exploding, you are already dead. This doesn't feel very good. I imagine a lot of the frustration many players have with this fight could have been avoided if this interaction didn't exist. But I also think it makes sense. I haven't actually talked much about the hero armor mechanic throughout this video, but I think now is a good time. Players in Splatoon have 100 HP. In Splatoon 1 single player, when you take 100 points of damage without healing, you die. That's not a lot, so the developers decided to have armor pickups in the levels, which essentially give you an additional 100 HP each. In the first campaign, you could stack up to 3 layers of armor, meaning you could take 400 points of damage before dying, along with gaining some invulnerability frames after each layer broke. I'd say this was pretty fairly balanced, allowing you to become a tank in some of the obstacle course stages, while forcing you to play more carefully in others. And notably, most of Splatoon 1's bosses did not have armor pickups, meaning they could and often would punish mistakes with a one-shot kill. This is probably why the boss checkpoints have always been so generous, as to not make the fights feel too punishing. But in Splatoon 2, they took a new approach. The player would now have one layer of armor built in by default. After taking 100 points of damage, instead of dying, your hero armor breaks. In this broken armor state, you move around very slowly, and you are meant to stay submerged in your ink until your armor repairs itself. The armor does restore even if you don't submerge, but it will take much longer, and in this state, taking any further amount of damage will kill you for real. In theory, this is a more forgiving system that makes it very obvious to the player when they are close to being killed, and teaches them to back away and seek cover before that happens. It eases the player into Splatoon's combat system while attempting to build habits that will serve them in multiplayer. But this system has an interesting effect on the rest of Splatoon's single-player design. It makes it so that the player is only truly punished for making 2 mistakes in a row. No single attack across the entirety of Splatoon 2 or 3 is a true one-shot. Everything short of falling off the stage can, and often will be, recoverable. When considering the role of the campaigns to introduce new players to Splatoon's gameplay and prepare them for the core multiplayer experience, I think this was a good change. However, it also had the effect of making many of the game's challenges, especially the boss fights, feel much easier than they would have otherwise. And I think this is why Inner Agent 3 feels like such a massive spike in difficulty, because all of a sudden, more often than not, one mistake is all it takes to send you back to the start of the fight. There's nowhere to run, no time to recover, and no checkpoints. If this was a required part of the game, with the ending locked behind it, I would agree that this was an unfair ask of players. However, as an optional post-game ultimate final challenge, I actually like this decision. You've had 2 entire campaigns to learn the game's mechanics, 3 if you started with Splatoon 1, so it's time for the gloves to come off. Make a mistake, get punished. Now you might say, okay, fine, just make it a regular one-shot then, not this slow, drawn-out, painful death. And, you know, they could have done that. I think that making deaths technically more punishing by instantly resetting you, but in execution less frustrating, could have been a valid balancing decision. But I don't think it would have actually made the fight better, because you can recover from broken armor in this fight. If you're able to wrap around a piece of cover, if you're far enough from where a bomb is thrown, if your movement is just good enough, you can sometimes make it out alive, allowing for incredible clutch moments that save you the fight. And I think that's kind of awesome. I can definitely see people disagreeing with me here. Phase 3 is where the fight goes from difficult to genuinely evil, and where I suspect most of the frustration toward the boss stems from. Personally though, I think once you learn how this phase works, you can come to appreciate this punishing design, and how it forces you to play better than you've ever had to. Hero armor allows for a single mistake to be punished severely, while also letting especially skilled players persevere. And of course, it's possible to beat the fight without breaking your armor at all. Finally, we get to Phase 4, which is actually a breeze compared to everything so far. Like Phase 3 of the original fight, Agent 3 will stay atop the UFO, shooting from above to paint the arena before unleashing waves of Tenta missiles. After each use of the special, the UFO will move to another side of the arena, and due to 3's increased health, this can make it tricky to land 2 bombs before they heal. It's not trivial, but simple enough after everything that came before. At last, it's Phase 5. Remember that cool one after another triple splashdown from the first fight? Here it is again, only sped up tremendously. You cannot outrun this attack simply by swimming away, and you barely get a chance to shoot 3 as they start up the next splashdown. So what do you have to do? Well, using a piece of cover, ideally the smaller one, you have to rotate around in a pattern of inking and swimming until the attack is over. This is the most precise and specific movement a Splatoon boss will ever ask of you, and it probably isn't something you're going to intuit right away, but that's what's so fun about it. This is genuinely a boss you have to learn. There's no dialogue telling you what to do, no glaringly obvious weak point. It's a bona fide video game-ass fight where you have to observe, fail, and try again until you finally get it down. In terms of individual attacks, this is my favorite out of any boss in the series. It's tricky to learn, incredibly satisfying to execute, and the result just looks cool. But even that isn't quite the end. 3 has a lot of health, and after the splashdowns, they'll continue to shoot and throw bombs in this phase. After enough time, they'll even pull out the triple splashdown again. And here is the most evil decision I think the Splatoon devs have ever made. When Inner Agent 3 is low on health and isn't already performing another action, they will, without warning, use a panic splashdown to save themselves. Admittedly, it's harder to defend this one. It really does feel like a nasty trick for the very end of the fight, but it also allows you to do this. You can finish off the boss with a splashdown cancel. One of the most satisfying bits of counterplay from PvP translated into single player for a climactic, stylish final blow. It feels so good to hit this. And even killing the boss normally, the dramatic slowdown and fade to white is absolutely euphoric. I know this boss can be divisive, and I don't want to boil it down to a matter of skill issue. This boss has things that could be seen as bad design. Unavoidable combos, counterplay that isn't entirely intuitive, nearly unreactable attacks. But you only get here for completing every other stage of a DLC that's already a step up in difficulty compared to the base game. I would argue it's fair to assume that, if you've met the requirements, you're someone who is looking for the game to ask more of you. Losing to Inner Agent 3 may feel punishing, but you respawn instantly with the music continuing to play. There are no lives, no load times, no limit to your attempts. While being set back 5 phases absolutely feels bad, a successful run only takes 2 to 3 minutes total. The game makes it very easy to keep trying, but it doesn't make it easy to win. And personally, I think that's great. There has never been a better test of the player's skill in Splatoon singleplayer. Your aim, your movement, your resource management, your strategy, every lesson you've learned comes into play during this encounter. You have to play your part in the dance. Mistakes are punished, skillful plays are rewarded. For me, it's an easy 5 out of 5. The gameplay alone is its own sort of spectacle, but how do the visuals and music fare? First, we have the build-up. After completing 80 tests, you hear the sound of a door opening, somewhere in the deep sea metro. Heading to Central Station, a bright light is seen shining from locker number 8. Interacting with it, you're told, "Your memories of that day, 2 years ago, have returned." The screen fades to white, and a UFO comes into view. Agent 3 appears in all their former glory, jumps down into the arena, and the fight begins. The context seems to be that this fight is happening in 8's mind, based on their memories of Agent 3's battle against DJ Octavio in Splatoon 1. Naturally then, the battle is backed by the Calamari incantation, with a modified intro and a slight reverb effect applied. It's hard to fully communicate how cool this felt if you were someone who played the games as they came out. All this talk of that battle 2 years ago hits a lot harder when that's the actual amount of time since you cleared Splatoon 1 single player. I don't think we need to bring back the agents in every story mode just for them to sit around, but this kind of fan service is fantastic. Let's move on to the arena. It's pretty simple, but has a surprising amount of cool details, like the Squid Sisters posters on the walls, the guitar, amps, turntable, and wasabi sticks. Around the stage are massive speakers, lights, and a giant disco ball, and in the background are the giant spinning tentacles straight from the actual Splatoon 1 Octavio fight, putting on a light show in the distance. Speaking of details, I love the touch of using the multiplayer kill feed when you defeat the boss. The original Agent 3 boss did this too, but it makes finally clearing this fight all the more satisfying. In terms of serving the gameplay, I like how clear and readable the playable area is, with bright lighting and a clean white floor, leaving it crystal clear what parts of the ground are inked and in what color. In a fight this intense, you need to be able to read your surroundings quickly, and because of that, I appreciate the simplicity. That said, the battle isn't quite as visually striking as some of the fights we've seen. It's very good, but without any fully unique cutscenes or breathtaking backgrounds, I can't put it on the same level as the best of the best. Depending on who you ask, this boss is either hailed as a highlight of the franchise or an infamous evil, but in both cases, it clearly has a legendary status. For a Splatoon boss to be remembered for its difficulty already carves out a distinct niche, and when considering the context and presentation on top of that, it's undeniable. Inner Agent 3 is iconic. It's the most difficult challenge in any Splatoon game. It's something streamers and Let's Players raged at, pro players cleared with ease to the amazement of their viewers. I genuinely think that overcoming this challenge as a community brought us together, despite the frustration. It's an incredibly memorable shared experience for everyone who played or even watched the DLC on launch. Beating the fight gives you a piece of gear that you can wear online as a trophy of your achievement. The devs knew what they were doing here, and I love that this kind of challenge, designed for the most dedicated of players, is something we have at all in a Nintendo game. I love Inner Agent 3. I want more things like it. As far as I'm concerned, Alterna should have had a super boss. Side Order should have had a super boss. I hope Splatoon Raiders has multiple. The best reward you can give players who have mastered every aspect of your game is a challenge that even they'll struggle to overcome. I acknowledge that this level of difficulty and this type of design are not what many players are looking for from the Splatoon series, but I believe that, in reasonable doses, this kind of challenge is just the thing these games are missing. I will always appreciate Inner Agent 3 for pushing the limits of what Splatoon can be. Here's hoping that's a trend that doesn't stop. Who else could it be but the king? Enter the Octobot King, the conclusion to Splatoon's first campaign, and my favorite boss fight, not just in this series, but in any game ever. I've sung this boss's praises for years. I'm sure for some of you, it's not a surprise to see it at number 1. So what is it that makes this boss so good? First of all, this entire fight takes place on a platforming obstacle course. Mr. Grizz and the Nil statue came close with their arenas, but Octobot 1 is easily the longest and most involved. There's no gimmicky final phase or playable cutscene going on here. Casually, it's around 11 minutes of pure action. Early on in this list, I mentioned that I like long fights when they're actually good, and here it is, the best and longest Splatoon boss. Let's get into the attacks. As I discussed in the other Octavio fights, Octobot 1's punches are, in my opinion, much more satisfying to shoot back, since you have to pay attention and land enough damage before they hit the floor. This quickens the pace of the entire fight, since you'll want to clear out any enemies and obstacles Octavio spawns in before the punches come out. Starting in Phase 1, Octavio will launch out 2 Octorpedoes, which lock onto the player and ink the floor if they aren't shot down. Then come the punches, starting with just one at a time. Notably, deflecting a punch doesn't just deal damage to an invisible health bar, it physically shoves the Octobot backwards through the stage. Your goal throughout the fight is to push the boss back so that you can progress through more and more of the level. I really love this dynamic. Splatoon 3's final boss has some great platforming, but their approaching Mr. Grizz is distinct from fighting Mr. Grizz. It's effectively a platforming segment followed by a combat segment. In Splatoon 1, both elements of the boss are happening simultaneously. You have to fight so that you can platform, and you have to platform so that you can fight. After being hit by 3 punches, Octavio pulls out a new attack, a giant, octopus-shaped subwoofer missile. This acts similarly to the punch attacks, requiring you to deal enough damage to send it flying back. However, it will need to be deflected 3 times instead of just once, and while you and Octavio are trading blows, he'll continue to launch out torpedoes for you to avoid. Landing the 3rd volley will finally deal a proper hit to the Octobot, ending the phase. Octavio will fly over to the next segment of the arena, where the player follows him via launchpad. From now on, each phase not only introduces new attacks, but also new platforming gimmicks to contend with. In Phase 2, the Octobot pulls out a modified killer whale, which will kill you or break your armor upon contact. To progress the fight, you must first deflect 2 punches, which now come out one after another, then take a propeller lift to the next platform. Here you can pick up some armor, send back 2 more punches, then use another lift. This pattern continues until you reach this elevated platform, where Octavio will unleash the 2nd missile, forcing you to evade 2 blasts from the killer whale while shooting it back. Additionally, the missile begins to travel faster and faster between each volley. Already we're seeing some great design. There's a constant flow between combat and movement, guiding your reticle from torpedo to fist to propeller. This is the foundation that makes this fight feel great to play. Now it just comes down to developing that formula. In Phase 3, you're given sponges to inflate with your ink, serving as both platforms and protection from the Octobot's projectiles. Among those projectiles is a new kind that, upon making contact with the ground, will spawn an enemy, either an octocopter or bomber. Shooting this spawner midair will destroy it, stopping the enemy from ever appearing. Octavio will send out 2 spawners and now 3 torpedoes with every barrage, so chances are you aren't going to shoot down all of them every time. More sponges are used, alongside some balloonfish to quickly expand them, as well as reclaim some turf for you to swim in. If Octavio fires a punch close enough to one of the balloons, they can even be used to send it back. The player is also given a one-time use special weapon, in this case an Inkzooka. Keep that in mind for later. Then comes the 3rd missile, fired alongside 2 more waves of torpedoes, spawners, and killer whales. Things are definitely heating up by now, but we're still only getting started. Phase 4. Octavio now uses all 4 torpedo launchers at once, followed immediately by 2 punches. The spawners now generate octoballs, and parts of the arena are now made up of invisible platforms. This gimmick doesn't get as significant use, but it is combined with gushers a couple of times to mix up the movement. Several torpedoes, spawners, and deflected punches later, we arrive at missile number 4. Beyond the increased torpedo count, the main difference this time around is the narrower terrain, as well as a balloonfish to help you a bit as you try to manage the chaos. Then, the tide of the battle finally turns. Hacking into DJ Octavio's sound system, the Squid Sisters begin playing their iconic song. A colorful laser show suddenly lights up the sky, and the final phase begins. The Octobot King fires on all cylinders. The attacks aren't actually evolved too much further, beyond the spawners now summoning Twinticle Octotroopers, but the terrain becomes much more narrow, giving you very little room for error. The killer whale now eliminates basically half of the arena while it fires, and you have to use ink rails to travel from platform to platform. Like I said, this isn't a playable cutscene. It's genuinely the hardest part of the fight, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here is where the game provides you with a second special type. You can choose to swap out your special for a bubbler, which would give you a brief window of invincibility during the final stretch, or you could hold onto the Inkzuka, giving you more range and a safer shot on the last missile. After one more armor pickup, you have to survive multiple waves of everything Octavio has been throwing at you, with only tiny bits of space on the sides to dodge. You push him back to the end of the ramp, shooting down torpedoes and enemies, evading killer whales, and deflecting punches. At long last, he launches the final missile. Once again, you have to hit it back 3 times, with it now speeding up a ridiculous amount after each hit. Succeed, and the missile will slam straight into the center of the Octobot King. Octavio himself will go flying, falling down toward the player. One more hit from any attack will finish him off, defeating the final boss and beating the game. Considering the developers have stated that this fight was one of the last things added to the game before release, it's incredible to me just how complete and polished it feels. This boss was exhilarating as a first-time player, and over the years, it has been my favorite by far to learn and master. In this fight, you're constantly moving forward, dodging to the side, interacting with platforming mechanics, tearing through obstacles, and using the boss's own strength against it. Skilled play is rewarded. The Octorpedoes target the last location they saw you in, so if you swim slightly to the side, you can trick them into missing you. Enemies only appear if you fail to shoot the spawners, so if you're diligent, they'll never be able to. And if you want to play aggressively, you can get right up close to the Octobot and shove its punches back as soon as possible, saving specials for the right moment to finish the job quickly. Admittedly, I don't think this fight has the highest skill ceiling of all, but it strikes a very solid balance of mandatory difficulty with optional instances of risk and reward. It has a wide variety of attacks that develop over the course of the battle, and it easily has the most interesting player movement out of any fight in the series, with the entire boss effectively being a platforming mission on top of a fight. Splatoon 1 really outdid itself with this finale. It punched high above its weight class and won, crafting a conclusion that remains mechanically at the peak of the series' single-player design. What about spectacle? Super jumping up to a UFO hovering above Octo Valley, we hop inside the final boss kettle. The UFO spins faster and faster, then launches into the air. Agent 3 arrives in a strange dark space, where they are immediately warned by the kidnapped cuttlefish that they've fallen into a trap. Left with no other choice, they step forward, approaching the stolen Great Zapfish. Immediately, the fish is pulled by a tractor beam into a distant machine, which unleashes a burst of energy, powering the massive steel tentacles surrounding the arena. Lowering the Octobot down to eye level, DJ Octavio reveals himself. A grandiose synth chord scores a camera zoom, we hear another as he raises 2 wasabi sticks, and then he scratches the records as a dance beat begins to play. This introduction is simple and silly, but I think it sets up Octavio perfectly as a character, and I would not change anything about it. Up to this point, I haven't actually talked much about Octavio himself, but he's easily one of my favorite character designs in Splatoon. An Octoling who lost the ability to shapeshift, DJ Octavio is the leader of the Octarians. He builds a sense of loyalty and unity among his people through the use of his Octotronica music. Through Splatoon 1's lore, we learn that the Octarians are suffering, and that Octavio took the Great Zapfish in part to help them, but also to reignite his rivalry with Captain Cuttlefish. He serves a genuine cause, but is also petty, focusing his efforts on military strength and producing music to get back at the Inklings who ruined him. On his head, he wears a samurai kabuto, suggesting that he sees himself as a warrior of the Octarians. His vehicle, the Octobot King, is part alien spaceship, part DJ booth, allowing him to spin sick beats while beating down his enemies. DJ Octavio is a great example of something in Splatoon being really weird and silly at first glance, but actually surprisingly thought out once you look into it. Later Splatoon games would add even more context, suggesting that the Octarians interpreted this encounter as a concert, and that both Marina and 8 were among the crowd. Following his introduction is the song I Am Octavio, which itself is fantastic, dynamically building throughout the fight, changing when a missile is being fired and adding more instruments in the later phases. This track is the most fully realized version of the Onward motif, with the main melodic idea of the song being the motif itself. It feels like the culmination of all of the Octarian music you've heard up to this point, and it's both fun and intense. But, of course, it was always meant to sound like an opening act. As we all know, the true star of the show is saved for the final phase. In 2015, hearing the Calamari incantation come in through the radio static for the first time was a magical moment. I think this is when a lot of us really first fell in love with Splatoon, when the style and infectious energy of the game's music and characters finally shined all the way through. The incantation remains as the most iconic song in the series to longtime fans and outsiders alike, and the original will forever be my favorite version. The remixes and variations over the years evolve the track and carry on its legacy, but for me, they've never managed to capture the same raw energy that this song provides. More than Title Rush, more than Fly Octo Fly, this song is Splatoon. Its melody is embedded into the lore, several characters' backstories, and the in-universe culture of the game. Everything that I love about Splatoon began here, with this song. And it is undeniably in large part responsible for making this boss and this moment live on in the memories of so many players. Musically, it's more basic than future versions would become, but I believe that its simplicity and repetition heighten its climactic feel, and allowed this melody to be etched into our minds and souls forever. Now, I'll admit, in some aspects, this fight has aged. Likely due to hardware limitations, budget, and production scope, Splatoon 1's final boss lacks the level of visual polish that we would start to see in Splatoon 2 and 3. The arena is a series of generic platforms with no attempt to fit them into any kind of environment. Speaking of, where even are we? I mean, we got here by flying a UFO into the sky, so space, I guess? But there aren't any stars. I think we're just not supposed to think about it. The cutscenes that play are very basic, consisting mostly of hard camera cuts, looping animations, and advanceable text boxes. Callie and Marie don't even appear in person. Like I said, it's aged a bit. But that's not to say it looks bad. The designs of DJ Octavio and the Octobot King are fantastic. The intro reveal, while simple, is still incredibly charming. And speaking of animation, Octavio himself is super expressive, scratching his records to charge up, then ducking into a pool of ink to launch a missile, panicking like crazy when it gets launched back, and dancing on beat to the music in the final phase. His dialogue is just as entertaining, from making stupid puns to calling Agent 3 a slimy little hipster. And by the end, the entire battle is encompassed in a flashy, colorful light show. The visuals may be a bit dated, but I would hardly call them bland or underwhelming. Do I wish this battle was a bit less video gamey and instead more grounded in a setting within Splatoon's world? Sure, I mean, that was effectively retconned in with a Splatoon 2 scroll anyway. But between Octavio's fantastic design, the legendary music, and all these other tiny details, I can't help but enjoy the look and sound of this fight. It's not the best the series has seen, but I can comfortably call it a great spectacle. And for the final score of this very long video, we have to talk about the Octobot King's identity. As far as I'm concerned, nothing comes close to the feeling of this fight. Yes, there are two other Octavios, but the attacks they use, the way they're designed, the structure of their fights, and the story context isn't the same. Among boss fights, most of Octobot 1's attacks are still entirely unique, from the killer whale, to the spawners, to the giant missile. The progression of the fight, which tests the player on platforming mechanics they've learned throughout the game, while also amping up the complexity of the combat, is simply unmatched. And the frantic final phase is still one of my favorite segments of Splatoon gameplay, way more mechanically satisfying than any other finale. I'm not afraid to admit that Octobot 1 is a high I have been chasing since 2015. No other boss feels this good, lasts this long, and remains this fun to play after so many years. And with the music and story of the battle only gaining more significance as the series has grown, this is a fight I will never forget. The Octobot King may not be completely perfect. I may be biased as someone who played this fight at an impressionable age, but it is undeniably something special. It's a part of Splatoon's history whose impact cannot be erased. And it showed me, personally, that Splatoon could be something more. Not just another Nintendo game for the Wii U, but a touchstone for gaming as a whole. On this channel, I like to talk about both Splatoon's lore and its gameplay. Most channels seem to focus more on one or the other. But to me, these two things are inseparable. The feeling of playing Splatoon is the feeling of being a part of its world, immersing yourself among its characters and leaving an impact on its history. Fighting DJ Octavio was the start of everything. My love for this fictional world, my experience in this community, and the impact I would hope to leave on both. It was a beautiful, colorful showdown that filled me with enough passion to last a decade and counting. Thanks for the show, Octavio. Crossfade to black. You know, at some point I need to stop being surprised at how long my videos can get. I really thought this one was gonna be like 40 minutes max, but as it turns out, I had a lot to say. I'm hardly the first person to make a video like this, but I really wanted to go in depth on each boss and get into the nitty-gritty of their design. I hope if you made it this far, it was entertaining. You may have noticed that, unlike the level ranking video, I did not give any boss a perfect score. There are fights with great gameplay, and others with remarkable presentation, but in my opinion, none that fully deliver in every category. On some level, this isn't too surprising. Splatoon's single players have always been second to the core multiplayer experience. There aren't that many bosses in each game, many have reused or reimagined the same mechanics, and typically only the final boss has a significant role in the story. There has been a lot of good design, and plenty of fights that almost get everything right, but ultimately, I think there is more to be desired from bosses in this series. With Splatoon Raiders on the horizon, I'm hoping we can see more from Splatoon's combat and movement, contextualized through set pieces that push the story forward. We'll just have to wait and see. As always, I'm sure some of my opinions, to some people, were very bad and wrong, so if you want to leave a comment expressing your own thoughts, I highly encourage it. I have a hunch that there will be stronger feelings surrounding Splatoon's bosses than there were the levels, so I'm bracing for impact, but I am genuinely curious to hear any counter-arguments for the scores I gave. Just please remember to be civil. I've pretty much covered everything I wanted to regarding Splatoon's gameplay for now, so next up should be another lore-focused video, though I completely expect some Splatoon Raiders news to throw that off course. At least I hope it does. Until then, thank you very much for watching. This has been Cosmic. Farewell.